The rain came in sideways off the Beartooth Range that September evening, the kind of rain that found every gap in your jacket and turned the highway into a black mirror reflecting nothing useful. Nora Callahan had been under a Dodge Ram since 2 in the afternoon, chasing a differential problem that kept revealing new layers every time she thought she had it solved, and she was behind on 2 other vehicles. And the Subaru she had promised by 7 was not going to be ready by 7. And she already knew how that conversation was going to feel. She heard the bay door open at 5:47. She heard 3 sets of footsteps, and she knew immediately they were wrong. Not the hesitant footsteps of someone who was not sure they had the right place. Not the easy footsteps of a regular. These were deliberate, measured. The footsteps of men who had decided something before they walked through the door. Nora rolled out from under the Ram and stood up. There were 3 of them. The first one was broad across the shoulders, wearing a canvas work jacket with no logo on it, his face carrying the relaxed expression of someone who found other people's discomfort genuinely interesting. The second was younger, thinner, with hands that would not stay still and eyes that moved around the shop the way a buyer's eyes move around a property they are already pricing in their head. The third stood near the bay door with his arms crossed, and he was not looking at Nora at all. He was looking at the hydraulic lift. "We close at 6, Nora said. "We are not here about a car," the broad one said. Nora set the wrench down on the workbench. Not because she was frightened, because she wanted her hands free. She said, "Then what can I help you with?" The broad one said, "Grant Hollis sent us." "You know who that is?" She knew. Everyone in Harlan County knew who Grant Hollis was. He had come up from Portland 4 years ago, and he had spent those 4 years buying property the way a careful man plays cards one piece at a time, never showing the hand until it was already won. A feed store here, a hardware operation there, a piece of undeveloped land on the east side of town that everybody had figured would go to a local family eventually. He had a development company called Summit Ridge with a website that looked like it belonged to a conservation nonprofit, clean and aspirational, and he showed up at town council meetings to talk about economic opportunity with the smooth patience of someone who already knew how the vote was going to go. He had come to see Nora 6 months ago, sat right there in the waiting room in the same plastic chair where her father used to drink his morning coffee, and made her an offer on the property. Not the business, the property, the land under the shop. The building her father had built with borrowed lumber and a second-hand lift he had spent 4 months getting level. Nora had been polite. She had said she was not interested. She had said it twice. Hollis had smiled and said he understood completely and that the offer would remain open. Nora had understood in the way you understand certain things without wanting to, that the smile meant something other than what it appeared to mean. "I know who Grant Hollis is," Nora said. "Good," the broad one said. "Then this will be a short conversation. Mr. Hollis has made you a fair offer on this property. More than fair given what it would cost to bring this operation up to current code." He said the last part with a slow look around the shop that was meant to diminish it. "He is asking you to reconsider." "He can ask all he wants," Nora said. "The answer is no." The broad one looked at her for a moment with that same relaxed expression. Then he nodded slowly like she had confirmed something he already expected. "That is unfortunate," he said. Then the thin one picked up a tire iron from the rack near the wall and swung it into the diagnostic computer. Nora moved toward him without thinking. The broad one stepped in front of her, not grabbing her, just placing himself in the way. And the third man, the one who had been studying the hydraulic lift, walked to the control panel and did something to it that Nora could not see clearly, but whose result she heard immediately. A grinding mechanical shriek, the sound of something being forced that was not designed to be forced. The thin one hit the computer again. The screen went dark. The monitor stand buckled, and the whole unit went sideways off the workbench and hit the concrete floor, and the sound it made, the specific sound of 3 years of her father's payments turning into broken plastic and ruined circuitry, went through Nora like something physical. "Stop it," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. "Stop it right now." The thin one looked at her and set the tire iron down on the workbench with deliberate care, like he was being tidy about it. "Mr. Hollis wants you to understand," the broad one said, "that this is a conversation you want to finish quickly. The next discussion will be harder to walk away from, structurally speaking." Nora looked at him. She understood that he was telling her they would burn the building down. She understood it clearly, and she felt something happen inside her that she had not quite felt before. Not fear exactly, though fear was part of it. Something harder than fear. something that sat in her chest like iron and had no interest whatsoever in being moved. "Get out," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Get out of my father's shop." The broad one looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he smiled and walked out. The other two followed. Nora stood in the silence for a moment and listened to the rain on the roof, and then she looked at the destroyed computer, and then she looked at the lift, which was clearly not going to function until someone who knew hydraulic systems spent several hours on it, and then she looked at the total picture of the evening. The Subaru unfinished, the Ram still waiting, $2,000 of diagnostic equipment on the floor in pieces, and the knowledge that Grant Hollis had just shown her exactly how far he was prepared to go. She did not cry. She was not going to cry. She pulled out her phone and called the Subaru's owner and told him the vehicle was not ready and that she was sorry and that she would discount the labor. Then she sat down on the rolling stool by the workbench and breathed. She had almost forgotten there was someone in the waiting room. The old man had been there since 3 in the afternoon. He came every Wednesday, almost without exception, had been coming since the previous November, 10 months now. He brought the same motorcycle each time, a vintage Harley Davidson that he maintained with the kind of obsessive consistency that meant he did not actually need to bring it in nearly as often as he did. Nora had figured that out after the second month. She had mentioned it once carefully. The way you mention something to a good customer when you want to be honest without being discouraging. He had looked at her with quiet gray eyes and said that the bike ran fine and he knew it, but that he appreciated having somewhere to be on Wednesday afternoons. She had not asked anything further. She did not know his name. She had never asked, and he had never offered, and somehow in 10 months that had never felt strange. He paid cash, always exact, always with a brief nod of thanks. He sat in the waiting area and drank 1 cup of black coffee, and sometimes read the newspaper she kept on the end table, and sometimes just sat. Now he was standing in the doorway between the waiting room and the main bay. He was a lean man somewhere north of 70, with a weathered face that suggested decades of outdoor living. His denim jacket was faded to the color of an overcast sky. His hands, Nora noticed, were the hands of someone who had worked with them for a very long time. Not delicate, not damaged. The hands that carried the specific, settled competence of long experience. He looked at the computer on the floor. He looked at the lift. He looked at Nora. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," Nora said. The word came out automatic and entirely unconvincing. He nodded, absorbing this with no visible skepticism. "You know who sent them?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Nora said. "You going to do what they are asking?" Nora looked up at him. "No," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and something moved in his expression. Not surprise. Something that looked like recognition. Like a particular answer he had been hoping to hear. "All right," he said quietly. He went back to the waiting area and picked up his jacket and his helmet. He paused at the bay door on his way out. "I will see you Wednesday," he said. Then he was gone. Nora sat in the wreckage of her Tuesday evening and thought not for the first time that there was something about that old man she could not quite read, something that felt inexplicably like the calm at the center of a storm that had not arrived yet. She pushed the thought aside. She had a Ram to finish and a lift to assess and a mortgage payment that was not going to make itself. She picked up her wrench and went back to work. Callahan Family Auto Repair had been standing on the same plot of Montana ground for 31 years. Ray Callahan built the first bay himself with borrowed lumber and a second-hand lift that took him 4 months to get level. He poured the concrete pad on a Saturday in October with 3 friends and Nora's mother Ellen, who handed him coffee every hour and never once complained about the cold. By the time Nora was born, the shop had 2 bays and a reputation that stretched 40 miles in every direction. By the time she was 10, it had 4 bays, a parts room, and a waiting area with a small television that Ray refused to upgrade because, as he put it, people come here for their cars, not their entertainment. Ray Callahan had the shop before Nora had her first loose tooth. That was the way he told it anyway when she was old enough to understand what it meant. He said it with a pride that embarrassed her when she was a teenager and filled her with something she could not name until she was older. Something that felt like being chosen. Like belonging somewhere so completely that the question of what you were going to do with your life never really needed asking. Ray died 18 months ago on a Tuesday. Heart attack fast. The doctor said he probably did not feel much. Nora was supposed to find comfort in that, and some days she almost did. Ellen had been gone 4 years before that cancer, slow and unkind. Nora had no siblings. She had her father's shop, his tools, his customer list written in his handwriting in a green ledger. She could not bring herself to transfer to a computer in a debt load that would have made a banker wince. Ray had borrowed against the property twice in his last years. Medical bills, equipment upgrades, a slow winter that went on longer than anyone expected. He had always meant to pay it down faster. He had always believed the next year would be better. Nora had believed that too, right up until the moment she sat across from the loan officer at First Montana Bank and watched him slide a sheet of paper across the desk with an expression that was professionally sympathetic and personally indifferent. "Your father was a valued customer," the man said. "I know what the numbers say," Nora told him. "I am asking what I have to do to keep the shop." The number was not impossible. It was the kind of number that would require everything she had and then some. Require her to work every hour she was not sleeping. Require her to rebuild the customer base her father had spent 30 years constructing. But it was not impossible. Nora had written it on a notepad and taped it above the workbench where she could see it every morning. She had been chasing that number for 8 months, and she had been slowly getting closer. That was the part that made what happened in late September so devastating. Not just the damage itself, but the timing. She had been close enough to almost believe it. The morning after the three men came, Nora took stock of the damage the way her father had taught her to assess any problem. Calmly, specifically, without drama. The diagnostic unit was beyond repair. The hydraulic lift would need a part she would have to order, which meant it would be down for at least 4 days, which meant she could only run 2 bays instead of 3 during what was historically her busiest stretch of the fall season. She had already lost 2 appointments by 8 in the morning because word traveled in a small town and somebody had apparently mentioned that the shop had some equipment trouble. She called her equipment supplier about replacing the diagnostic unit. The woman who answered had been her father's contact for 12 years, and she was apologetic in a way that made Nora's stomach tighten. "I am so sorry," she said. "I would love to help, but I cannot extend credit right now on the account. You are already at the limit and with the uncertainty about the business." "What uncertainty?" Nora said. "There is no uncertainty. The shop is open." "I understand, but there has been talk, and I have to follow our policies." "Who told you there was uncertainty about my business?" A pause. "Someone from Summit Ridge Development called us last week," the woman said. "Said they were going to be developing the property and were notifying the business's creditors as a courtesy so they could manage their exposure. I am sorry, I did not know what to think." Nora thanked her and hung up and sat very still for 30 seconds. Hollis had called her suppliers before he had even sent those men to the shop. He had been making calls. He had been systematically cutting the ground out from under her. Her credit lines, her creditors, probably her customers too, if she looked closely enough. She looked closely enough. It took her the better part of that morning making calls she had not needed to make in years. And what she found was a pattern that was both calculated and infuriating. 2 customers had canceled appointments in the past week, citing vague reasons that did not quite ring true. One of her parts suppliers had reviewed her account and was now requiring payment in full at the time of order, rather than extending the 30-day terms she had maintained for 6 years. Her insurance agent had left a message about a policy review that Nora had not thought much about until now. The picture was clear. Hollis was not just threatening her. He was strangling her. Methodically, professionally, with the patience of someone who had done this before. Nora sat in the office and looked at the number on the notepad above the workbench. The number she had to reach, and she felt for the first time since Ray died, something that was genuinely close to fear. Not the sharp fear of danger, the slow fear of arithmetic, of watching the numbers stop working in her direction no matter how hard she pushed. She did not let herself sit with that feeling long. She called every customer on her list personally. Not form letters, not texts, phone calls, her voice, her father's name. She told them the shop was open. She told them she was Ray Callahan's daughter, and this shop had been serving Harlan County for 31 years, and she intended to continue that. She heard warmth in most of the voices she reached. She heard hesitation in some. She noted carefully which ones she would need to follow up with. Then she got back under the ram and kept working. Wednesday came. Nora was not sure she had been looking forward to it or simply expecting it the way you expect a particular weather pattern. But at 4:15, she heard the Harley pull in. She finished what she was doing, torquing down a bolt on the transmission job she had finally resolved, and wiped her hands and went to the waiting room. He was already there. coffee in hand, looking at nothing in particular with those quiet gray eyes. "You came back," Nora said. "Said I would," he replied. She sat down across from him. She almost never sat in the waiting area during the day, almost never stopped moving. And she said, without quite planning to, "They have been calling my suppliers, my customers. They have been doing it for weeks." He looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. Nora blinked. "What do you mean you know?" "I mean, I had an idea this was broader than one visit," he said. "Men like that do not use muscle until the ground is already prepared." Nora studied him. There was something about the way he spoke. Not the words themselves, but the cadence, the specific economy of the language, the absence of hedging or qualification. It was the way her father spoke when he was talking about something he understood completely. "Who are you?" Nora said. He looked at her for a moment. "Holt Mercer," he said. "Holt Mercer," Nora repeated. "And you come here every Wednesday because it is a good shop," he said, "and because some things are worth keeping." Nora did not know what to do with that. She sat with it for a moment. "What do I do?" she said. She had not meant to say it. She had not asked anyone that question since Ray died. Had actively refused to ask it because asking it felt like admitting something she did not want to admit. Holt Mercer looked at his coffee cup. "Same thing you have been doing," he said. "Keep the doors open. Do not flinch." "That is easy to say." "I know it is," he said. "I am not saying it is easy to do." He finished his coffee and set the cup down and stood up. "I will have a look at that lift before I go," he said. Nora stared at him. "You know hydraulic lifts." "I know a few things," he said. He spent 40 minutes on the lift. When he was done, it worked. Nora did not ask him how. She could see where he had improvised with a component, a solution that would not be permanent, but would hold until the ordered part arrived. It was the kind of repair that required knowing exactly what you were doing, the kind of diagnostic intuition that came from decades of mechanical experience. The hands of someone who had worked with them for a very long time, she thought. That was what she had noticed when he first walked into the bay. That was what she was looking at now. She paid him for the work. He tried to decline. She insisted with a firmness that finally made him accept. And she watched him put on his helmet and ride out into the early evening and tried to figure out exactly what was happening. She did not figure it out that day. Ray Callahan had built this place with his hands and his stubbornness, and a deep, uncomplicated faith in the idea that if you did good work and charged honestly and showed up every day, then eventually the world would meet you where you were. He had never been wrong about that, not in 31 years. He had never needed to explain it to Nora because she had grown up watching it be true. The shop was not just a building. It was a proof. It was evidence accumulated over 3 decades that the way he believed you should move through the world actually worked. Nora understood, standing in the empty bay after the sound of the Harley faded, that what Hollis was trying to take was not just a building. He was trying to invalidate the proof. He was trying to demonstrate that the world her father believed in was naive, that it could be bought and bullied and leveraged out of existence by a man in a fleece vest with a clean website and a patient smile. She was not going to let that happen. She locked the bay door. She finished the books. She turned off the lights one at a time, and when she left, she paused in the doorway and looked back at the shop. The 4 bays her father had built. The workbenches worn smooth by 30 years of work. The tools hung in their places on the pegboard walls. The waiting area with the plastic chairs and the small television Ray had refused to upgrade. She looked at it the way her father used to look at it at the end of a long day. The way you look at something you have built and maintained and refuse to let go of. The way you look at something that belongs to you, not because of a deed or a title, but because of what you have given it. "I am not selling," she said to the empty shop. The words did not echo. They just sat there in the air for a moment, quiet and completely serious. Then she turned off the last light and walked to her truck. Behind her, somewhere on the highway, she heard the distant sound of a motorcycle engine, steady, unhurried, heading in a direction she could not see. The next morning, Nora took the damage assessment her father had taught her and applied it to the broader situation with the same methodical clarity she would have applied to a complicated engine problem. She wrote down what she knew. She wrote down what she did not know. She wrote down what she could control and what she could not. Then she went to work on the things she could control. She called every supplier personally. She did not send emails. She made the calls herself in the same direct voice she used when she was explaining to a customer what was wrong with their car. She told them the shop was open. She told them Ray Callahan's daughter was running it and that she intended to keep running it, and that any information they had received from Summit Ridge Development about the property was inaccurate. Some of them she could hear recalibrating in real time. Some of them were warmer than she expected. Some were cautious in ways that told her Hollis's reach was longer than she had initially understood. She got back as much ground as she could that day. She did not get back all of it. Thursday was the day Wade Kowalski came in. Wade had been a Callahan auto customer for more than 20 years. He ran a small trucking operation out of Harley and 3 rigs, small contracts, the kind of business that lived and died on reliability. Nora knew him the way you know someone you have grown up around. Not intimately, but solidly. The way you know the weight of a familiar tool. He had canceled an appointment 2 weeks ago with an excuse that had not quite rung true, and Nora had noted it in the mental ledger she had been keeping of who had pulled back and why. He came in with his hat in his hands, which was not how Wade Kowalski usually entered a room. "Nora," he said. "Wade." He looked at the floor for a moment, then looked up at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You do not owe me anything," she said. She kept working. She was doing a brake inspection on a Chevy Silverado, but she was listening. "I got a call," he said. "A man I did not know said he was from Summit Ridge, said they were acquiring the property and the shop would be closing within 60 days, and that I should make alternative arrangements for my fleet maintenance." He paused. "I should have called you. I should have checked." "Why did you not?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Because the man sounded very sure of himself," he said. "And I have got 3 trucks. Nora and I cannot afford to be caught without a reliable shop." He stopped. "I should have called you," he said again. "I am sorry." Nora set down the brake caliper she was holding and turned to look at him. "The shop is not closing," she said. "Hollis wants it closed. That is different." Wade met her eyes. Something shifted in his expression. "That is what I figured once I thought about it more than 5 minutes," he said, "which is why I am here." He turned his hat over in his hands. "I have got a full-size pickup that needs a transmission service and 2 rigs due for inspections next month. I would like to bring them all here if you will take them." Nora looked at him steadily. She was running the math in her head. The transmission service alone was significant. The commercial inspection work on 2 large rigs was exactly the kind of revenue she needed. "I will take them," she said. Wade nodded. He looked relieved in the specific way of a man who has done something he should have done sooner. "One more thing," he said. "There are other people who got that call, businesses around town. I have been talking to a few of them this morning." He paused. "People are angry, Nora. Angrier than Hollis probably expected." Nora felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear this time, her own anger, but the useful kind, the kind that had direction. "Let them be angry," she said, "but tell them the shop is open." "Already did," Wade said. He put his hat back on and left. Nora stood there for a moment in the particular silence of a situation that has just shifted. Not resolved, not fixed, but shifted. She was still behind. She was still in trouble. But the ground under her feet felt marginally less like water and slightly more like something she could push off of. She went back to the brake inspection. By noon, she had 4 cars in process and a waiting list for the afternoon. 2 of the customers who had canceled had rescheduled. One had brought in a car she had not even called about a referral from someone Nora had never met. A woman named Patricia Grange dropped off her car that afternoon and introduced herself with the directness of someone who had raised children and survived difficulties and had a very low tolerance for being managed. "My husband built a small business from nothing, and somebody tried to do the same thing to him. 20 years ago," Patricia said. "Different town, different method." She looked at Nora. He did not back down either. Nora started to thank her. "Do not thank me," Patricia said. "Fix the car, do good work. That is what your father would say." Nora stopped in the middle of writing the work order. "Did you know my father?" she said. Patricia smiled. "Everyone knew Ray Callahan. He fixed my first car in 1998 and charged me half what he should have because he said it was a simple job, and he did not believe in charging for time he had not actually spent." She paused. "That is a rare thing." She left. Nora held the work order for a moment and felt her father's presence in the shop the way she always did when someone said something true about him. Not a ghost, not a comfort exactly, but a kind of specificity, a reminder of what the shop was actually built on. She put the work order on the board and kept moving. Friday was the day the second warning came. She was closing up just past 6, running late, because the afternoon had been relentless, in the best way, when the phone in the office rang. She almost did not answer it. She had a policy about after-hours calls going to voicemail, a policy she had put in place because otherwise she would never stop working. She answered it anyway. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, with the careful enunciation of someone who wanted to be understood precisely. "Ms. Callahan," he said, "I am calling on behalf of Mr. Hollis as a courtesy." "You can stop there," Nora said. "I understand you are upset about Tuesday evening. Mr. Hollis regrets that the situation escalated." "I said you can stop there." A pause. The careful voice recalibrated. "Ms. Callahan, you are a young woman running a business alone with significant debt in a market that is contracting. Mr. Hollis's offer represents genuine value." Nora said Mr. Hollis's offer represents what happens when someone decides that taking something from a person who will not give it is the same as earning it. It is not. Tell him I said that. Another pause, longer this time. "That is unfortunate," the voice said. "I hope you will reconsider before the situation becomes more complicated." "I hope so too," Nora said. "But I do not think either of us is going to get what we are hoping for here." She hung up. She sat in her father's chair in her father's office. She still thought of it as her father's office. Still had not changed the photograph of Ray and Ellen on the desk. Still kept his coffee mug on the same shelf where he had always left it. She breathed through the adrenaline the call had produced. More complicated, that was the phrase. Not a threat technically. Technically just a suggestion about the future. But Nora Callahan had been running a shop long enough to know the difference between a misfire and an engine problem. And this was not a misfire. She looked at the mortgage number on the notepad. She looked at her accounts receivable for the week. Better than she had expected between Wade Kowalski and Patricia Grange and the rescheduled appointments in 3 others she had not even counted on. Still not enough. Still not fast enough. Not by a long distance. She turned off the office light and went through the bay to finish locking up. Holt was in the parking lot on the Harley, engine off, just sitting there. Nora stopped. "Were you out here the whole time?" she said. "A while," he said. "You heard the phone ring. I heard you answer it. How did you leave it?" "I told him to tell Hollis I was not interested," Nora said. Holt nodded once. He was looking at her with that particular expression she had been trying to decode for almost a year. Not distant, not warm exactly, but completely attentive in the way of someone who has learned through long experience what it costs to not pay attention. "They are going to move faster now," he said. "You are not going to be able to manage this alone much longer." Nora felt the resistance rise in her, the bone-deep inherited resistance of a woman who had been managing alone since her mother died and harder since her father died, who had built her self-sufficiency into something almost structural, almost load-bearing. "I have been managing fine," she said. "You have been remarkable," Holt said. "That is different from fine, and it is different from enough." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" she said. Holt got off the bike. He did not do it quickly. He moved with the deliberateness of a man who had learned to treat his joints with respect. He stood beside it and looked at the shop for a moment. "Your father's name still means something in this county," he said. "Ray Callahan was known as a man who did right. That matters. But Hollis is working faster than reputation can work. And reputation alone does not stop 3 men with a crowbar and a can of gasoline." Nora said nothing. "I have made some calls," Holt said. Nora went very still. "What kind of calls?" "The kind that needed to be made," he said. "To people I know. People who understand what is happening here and why it matters." "Who are these people?" He looked at her directly. "People who spent a long time learning that the world does not run on good intentions," he said. "It runs on who shows up." Nora studied his face. He was not deflecting. He was giving her what he could in the language he was most comfortable with, which was the language of action and consequence, rather than explanation and biography. "Are you going to tell me who you actually are?" she said. "I am a man who used to ride with people who took certain things seriously," Holt said. "Loyalty, protecting what is worth protecting, not leaving honest people to face dishonest pressure alone." He paused. "I am retired, but the things I believe in are not retired." Nora felt something go through her. Not quite fear and not quite awe. Something that was more like standing very close to a large old thing and suddenly understanding how deep its roots go. "What I need to know," he said, "is whether you trust me." Nora Callahan looked at this man who had been showing up in her shop every Wednesday for 10 months, who had fixed her lift without being asked, who had sat in her waiting area and drunk his coffee and never once asked for anything in return. "Yes," she said, Good, Holt said. He picked up his helmet. Keep the doors open Monday. Some people might stop by. What people? People who heard Ray Callahan ran a good shop, he said, and that his daughter is worth knowing. He put on the helmet and started the bike. Nora stood in the parking lot and watched him go and realized she had just agreed to something without knowing what it was. And she realized more slowly that she was not afraid of that. She stood there after the taillight disappeared around the long curve north. The rain had stopped while they were talking, and the air had that specific clean coldness that came after a Montana September storm, the kind that made everything smell like pine and distance and something just beginning. She was Ray Callahan's daughter. She had her father's hands and her father's stubbornness and her father's inability to look at something broken and walk away from it. She had 31 years of evidence that doing the work right was worth it. And now she had something she had not had since the morning she unlocked the shop after Ray's funeral and understood for the first time that she was the only one left. She was not alone. She did not know yet what that was going to look like. She did not know about the phone calls already being made, the quiet conversations happening in garages and on back roads, across 3 states, the people who had already said yes before they were even asked, because a voice on the phone had said a sentence that carried 10 months of careful watching behind it. She did not know any of that. But she locked the bay door and she said she was not selling, and she drove home like someone who had decided. And sometimes in the long history of things that matter, that is exactly where everything begins. Ray Callahan had opinions about coffee, about the right way to clean a carburetor, about how long you should let an engine warm up in winter before you put load on it, and about the particular dishonesty of charging a customer for labor time you had not actually spent. He had opinions about most things mechanical and a few things that were not mechanical at all, and he expressed these opinions in the same way he expressed everything else directly and without a great deal of ornamentation. Nora had grown up inside those opinions the way you grow up inside a climate, not noticing it most of the time, but shaped by it entirely. She had been 7 years old the first time she handed him a tool he did not ask for and got it right. A 3/8 drive ratchet, and she had known it was the 3/8 because she had been watching him and had seen which socket he had just used and understood that he needed the ratchet to go with it. He had taken it from her without looking up from the engine and said, "Good." Just that one word. But the way he said it had meant something specific. It had meant you are paying attention. It had meant that is the right way to learn. She had been paying attention ever since. The shop had been her classroom in every sense that mattered. She knew how to read a timing light and how to feel for bearing play and how to listen to an idle and hear in the frequency and quality of the sound what was happening inside the engine. She knew which customers needed a full explanation of what she had found and which ones just wanted to know what it was going to cost and when it would be done. She knew how to write up an estimate that was honest about uncertainty and how to call a customer when something turned out to be worse than expected without making them feel ambushed. All of this was Ray's teaching delivered not in lessons, but in the accumulation of his example over 30 years. He had not sat her down and explained how to run a shop. He had just run one in front of her for her entire life, and she had absorbed it the way children absorb the things they grow up watching. That was what she was thinking about on the Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after Holt's first visit, when she was alone in the shop doing the kind of organizational work that only got done when there were no customers. Cleaning reshelving, doing a proper inventory of the parts room that she had been putting off because there was always something more urgent. She was thinking about how much of what she knew came from watching her father work, and about how much of what he had built here was invisible in exactly the way knowledge is invisible when it has been completely absorbed. The phone rang, and it was her supplier, Sandra, the one who had told her about Summit Ridge's calls. Sandra's voice was different than it had been during that first uncomfortable call. Warmer, more like it had been before any of this happened. "I wanted to call and tell you myself," Sandra said. "I had a conversation with my regional manager, and I am going to be able to restore your credit terms. What happened, what those people did, that is not something I should have let affect my business with you." Nora thanked her. "I also want to say something else," Sandra said. "Your father and I worked together for 11 years. He was one of the most straightforward people I ever dealt with. When he said he needed something by Tuesday, he meant Tuesday, and when he said a job was going to take a certain amount of time, it took exactly that amount of time." She paused. "I should have remembered that when I got that call. I am sorry I did not." Nora thanked her again and meant it more this time. After she hung up, she stood in the parts room for a while, surrounded by the organized rows of filters and gaskets and belts and fluids, all of it in the places Ray had designated for them and that she had maintained without changing, because there was no reason to change something that worked. She thought about 11 years of reliable dealings and how that had not been enough to withstand the pressure Hollis had applied. And she thought about what that said about the kind of pressure Hollis had learned to apply and the patience with which he applied it. Then she thought about what it meant that Sandra had called back. It meant that the infrastructure her father had built, the web of relationships and trust and reputation that extended out from this shop in every direction, was not as easily destroyed as Hollis had calculated. It had bent under the pressure. It had not broken. And now that the pressure had been named and exposed, it was beginning to reassert itself. She went back to the inventory and finished it, and then she mopped the floor of the parts room, which did not strictly need mopping, but which Ray had always mopped when he did an inventory because he said you should always leave something cleaner than you found it. She mopped it, and then she turned off the lights and locked the parts room and walked through the main bay and checked the tools one more time before she left. She stopped in the middle of the bay and stood there for a moment. The 4 bays were clean, and the tools were hung correctly, and the workbenches were as organized as she could make them, given the available time, and the single overhead light that she left on every night was casting its usual yellow glow across the concrete floor. The bay smelled like oil and metal and the particular industrial cleanliness of a well-maintained garage. It smelled like her father. She stood there for another minute without moving and without thinking about anything in particular. Just being in the place. Just feeling the specific weight of the building around her, the walls that Ray had built, and the floor he had poured, and the air that had been breathed in this space for 31 years by mechanics doing their work. Then she locked up and drove home. She slept better that night than she had since September. The days between the first Wednesday after the attack and the second Wednesday had their own texture. Nora moved through them with the focused momentum of someone who has made a decision and is executing it. She called customers. She worked long hours. She finished the jobs she was behind on and took on new ones and managed the 2-bay limitation of the broken lift with the improvisational efficiency that comes from not having a better option. The man who had stood on the sidewalk came back. He was there on Thursday afternoon for 30 minutes in the same position, doing the same nothing. Nora went out and stood in the bay door again and looked at him again. He held her gaze for a while this time before he got in his car. Nora went back inside. She wrote down the time and the description of the car and the partial plate number she had managed to read and added it to the document she was building under the cash drawer. She was not afraid of him. That was the thing she noticed. She had been afraid on the night the 3 men came, a cold background fear that she had been managing rather than admitting. She was not afraid of the man on the sidewalk. He was surveillance. He was Hollis checking whether the pressure was working. The fact that he kept coming back suggested that Hollis did not yet have the answer he wanted. Good, she thought. Let him keep checking. On Friday, but Patricia Grange called to say that her neighbor's son needed a transmission rebuilt, and had she heard anything about a good shop in the area. Nora had scheduled him for the following Tuesday. It was a significant job, big enough to matter. On Saturday, she got a card in the mail from Dave Fenwick, who had been bringing his trucks to Callahan Auto for 18 years, and whose company Hollis's people had apparently also called. The card said, "I heard what they tried to do. We are still with you." There was nothing else in the card, just that sentence in his signature, but Nora stood in the office and held it for a while before she put it on the shelf beside her father's coffee mug. She was Ray Callahan's daughter. She had his hands and his stubbornness and his way of moving through problems, which was to face them directly and do the work, and not to spend any more energy than necessary on the anxiety that problems naturally generated. He had passed all of this on to her so completely that she had not realized she had it until she needed it. She was grateful for that now, more grateful than she could have articulated. Wednesday came. The Thursday before Agent Pruitt called was the day Nora had what she later thought of as the settling. Not a revelation, not a turning point, just a moment of settling, the way a building settles on its foundation. She was doing a valve job on a 2014 Silverado, the kind of job that required concentration, but not the kind that occupied the whole mind. And she was listening to the sound of the shop around her, the hiss of the pneumatic tool, the rain against the roof, the distant sound of the highway, and she understood with a completeness that had been building for weeks that she was not going to sell. Not because she had decided not to. She had decided not to on the first night when she told 3 men to get out. But deciding and knowing are different things, and what she felt now under that Silverado with her hands in a familiar position and the shop making its familiar sounds around her was knowing. The settled certainty of something that had gone from a decision to a fact. She was going to make the mortgage payment. She was going to keep the doors open. She was going to rebuild the customer base and the supplier relationships and the commercial accounts. And in 10 years or 20 years, someone was going to walk into this shop and say, "I remember when you almost lost it to that developer," and Nora was going to say yes, and it would be a thing that had happened and been survived. She held that for a moment, then she went back to the valve job. After she finished, she sat in the office and looked at the numbers again. She had been looking at them every evening, and the picture had been gradually improving, not dramatically but consistently, the way a machine improves after proper maintenance. Wade Kowalski's transmission service was scheduled for next week. Patricia Grange's neighbor was coming in for the transmission rebuild. 2 new customers had called, one referral from Wade and one apparently from nothing more than a neighbor mentioning the shop in passing. The gap was still real, but it was smaller than it had been. She called her sister in Portland, which she did not do often because she and her sister had a relationship that was warm but intermittent, the kind that worked better with some distance and did not require maintenance to remain fundamentally solid. She told her sister the outline of what had been happening. She did not tell her about Holt or about Wednesday evenings or about the specific strange comfort of a man she barely knew showing up every week and sitting quietly in the waiting room. Your father would have handled it the same way, her sister said. Nora was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. Is there anything you need, her sister said. No, Nora said. I think I have what I need. She meant it when she said it, and she still meant it when she hung up, which was the first time in months that those words had felt entirely true. The following Monday, she got a call from a man named Pete Garland, who ran a mobile welding operation out of the county and needed a shop he could trust for his work truck. He had heard about Callahan Auto from Wade Kowalski, who had apparently told him that it was the most reliable shop in the area and that the owner was someone who would tell you what was wrong and what it was going to cost and then do what she said she was going to do. Nora scheduled him for the following week. She was beginning to understand that what Hollis had tried to destroy the web of small interactions and kept promises and honest dealings that made up a repair shop's reputation was actually more robust than she had feared. It had been damaged. Some threads had been cut, but the structure held, and as the reason for the damage became known as word spread, that Summit Ridge had been deliberately cutting her supplier relationships and calling her customers, people were recalibrating. The damage that had been done by deception was reversing itself now that the deception was known. It was not fast. It was not dramatic. It was the quiet, steady reassertion of a truth that had been suppressed. But it was happening, and Nora could feel it in the texture of the week, in the slight warming she heard in voices that had been cautious the previous week in the customers who came in, having clearly made a deliberate choice to come here rather than elsewhere. She was Ray Callahan's daughter, and this was Ray Callahan's shop. And everyone in Harlan County had known for 31 years what that meant in practical terms. Hollis had tried to complicate that. He had not managed to erase it. She went to work. The following week, the situation worsened. A parts supplier Nora had used for brake components for 6 years refused her order without explanation. Just a refusal and a number she could call to discuss her account, a number that rang twice and went to voicemail. A man she had never seen before showed up and stood on the sidewalk across from the shop for 20 minutes, not doing anything, just standing there in a way that was clearly intended to be noticed. Nora noticed. She went out and stood in the bay doorway and looked at him. He looked back. Then he got in his car and drove away. Nora went back inside and finished the valve job she was in the middle of and tried to control the rage that was building in her chest, not the hot, scattered rage of fear, the deep structural rage of someone watching something precious and legitimate being taken apart by people with no right to touch it. She controlled it the way her father had taught her to control the impulse to force a stubborn bolt. Steady pressure, patience. Know where you are applying the force and why. She had work to do. She did it. Thursday morning, Wade Kowalski called. There are other people who got that call from Summit Ridge, he said, not just local business owners. Some of your supplier contacts, people you have worked with for years. He paused. Nora, somebody put a lot of effort into this before those three men ever walked through your bay door. I know, Nora said. People are talking about it, Wade said. The ones who are angry, which is most of them. There is a woman named Greta Holt, no relation to anybody you know, who runs the bakery on Stillwater. She got the same call, said she had been wondering who else received it. Tell anyone who wants to know that the shop is open, Nora said. Tell them Ray Callahan's daughter is still here and she is not going anywhere. Already told them, Wade said. Just wanted you to know the word is moving. Nora thanked him and hung up and stood at the workbench for a moment, looking at the number on the notepad. The number had not changed. The gap between where she was and where she needed to be had not shrunk overnight. But she thought about what it meant that other people were angry. Anger was energy. Anger was direction. Anger properly applied was the same thing as work. She opened the shop and kept going. Wednesday came the way it always came, quietly, with the particular quality of late September light that hit the shop windows in the mid-afternoon and made everything inside look warmer than it was. Nora heard the Harley pull in at 4:15 and felt something she was not entirely prepared to feel, which was relief. She finished what she was doing, wiped her hands, and went to the waiting room. Holt was already there, coffee in hand, the same chair, the same quiet gray eyes looking at nothing in particular. They have been calling my suppliers, Nora said, sitting down across from him. My customers, other businesses in town. She paused. This has been going on longer than I knew. Holt looked at her steadily. I know, he said. Nora blinked. What do you mean, you know? I mean, I have been watching this situation develop for longer than you know, he said. Hollis does not improvise. He prepares. What came through your door in September was the last step in a process that started months before that. He said it the way he said everything, without hedging, without softening, as if he were describing the behavior of an engine rather than a man. Nora studied him. The cadence again. The specific economy of the language. Who are you, she said. And I mean that seriously this time. Not just a name. Holt looked at his coffee cup. Your father knew who I was, he said. Nora felt the breath go out of her. What? Not well, Holt said. We spoke 2, maybe 3 times over the years. He was a good man. He cared about doing things right in a way that was not complicated or performed. It was just how he was built. He paused. When I heard he had passed, I came to see what kind of person his daughter was. Nora looked at him. And you have been here every Wednesday for 10 months, she said. Holt looked back at her with the steady gray eyes. Which I think answers your question, he said. She sat with him that for a long moment. The shop was quiet around them. The kind of quiet that only existed after closing when the equipment had stopped and the highway outside had thinned, and the building itself seemed to settle into something close to stillness. My father never mentioned you, she said. He would not have, Holt said. I asked him not to. Why? Because some things are more useful when they are quiet, he said. Nora opened her mouth to press further, and then for reasons she could not entirely explain, decided to let it rest. There was something in his answer that was not evasive and not dishonest. Something else. Something that felt like a man who had learned through long experience that explanations were less valuable than actions. She sat there for a while and watched the light change in the shop windows. The man on the sidewalk, she said. The one who came back this week. I saw him, Holt said. He is going to come back. Probably, Holt said. And then what? Holt finished his coffee and set the cup down and stood up and put his jacket on. There are people, he said, carefully, who have spent their lives learning what it costs to protect something worth protecting. Some of them are retired now. Most of them are, he paused. But retired does not mean gone. He picked up his helmet. Lock that bay door properly tonight, he said. Then he left. Nora sat alone in the waiting room after the sound of the Harley faded and felt something she had not felt since before the diagnostic computer hit the floor. Not certainty, not safety, something smaller than those things but more durable. Something that felt like not alone. She locked the bay door. She finished the books. She turned off the lights one at a time. 2 evenings later, she was doing paperwork in the office when she heard something in the main bay. She grabbed the flashlight from the desk drawer and went through the door ready for something bad. It was Holt. He was at the workbench with a handheld OBD reader she had thought was finished after one of the men had knocked it off the shelf during the attack. He had it open on the workbench and his hands were doing something careful and precise to the circuitry inside. How did you get in? Nora said. Bay door was unlocked, he said without looking up. Nora started to say that no, it was not. She specifically remembered locking it and then stopped herself. Because the more interesting question was not how he had gotten in, but what he was doing and why. She sat down on the stool and watched him work. The OBD reader's display lit up when he clicked the casing back together. Clean and functional. Holt, she said. He looked up. What is going on? She said it plainly. I mean, who are you? And do not tell me you are a man who likes getting his Harley serviced on Wednesdays, because I have been trying to believe that for 10 months and I do not think I can anymore. Holt looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the small screwdriver he had been using and set it carefully on the workbench. Your father fixed my motorcycle once, he said. About 15 years ago, I was passing through Harlan Belt Drive problem. Bad enough I could not get another 50 miles on it. I walked the bike to the nearest shop, which was here. He paused. Ray Callahan spent 4 hours on that motorcycle. Would not let me pay for more than the parts. Said fixing a machine right was its own payment. He was quiet. I have met a lot of people in my life, he said. Men who said one thing and did another. Men who talked about integrity like it was something you wore on occasion. Ray Callahan did not talk about it. He just did it. Another pause. When I heard he died, I came to see if he had left anything behind worth keeping. Nora could not speak for a moment. He left you behind, Holt said. The words sat in the air between them with the weight of something much larger than 4 syllables. Nora looked down at the workbench. She breathed carefully. The problem, she said when she trusted her voice again, is that being worth keeping is not going to make the mortgage payment. No, Holt agreed. But there is something else you should know. He stood and put his jacket on. There is a man named Calhoun Steed. He runs a construction company out of Grover County, about 30 miles east. He has a fleet of 15 commercial vehicles, and he has been dissatisfied with his current shop for about 6 months but has not moved yet. Nora looked at him. How do you know that? Because I had coffee with him last Thursday, Holt said. I told him about this shop. I told him about your father. I told him what I know about how you work. He paused. He is going to call you tomorrow morning. Nora stared. You have been doing this, she said. It came out as a statement, not a question. Some version of it, Holt said. How long? A while, he said. Nora tried to count backward. The customers who had returned with reasons that did not quite track. The referrals that had come from directions she could not map. She had not questioned them because she had been too busy and too grateful. But now sitting here, she could feel the shape of something that had been operating quietly beneath the surface of her daily struggle. You've been running a campaign, she said. I have been talking to people, Holt said, about a shop worth supporting. He paused. That is not all I have been doing. Nora looked at her hands. They were a mechanic's hands. Calloused, stained in ways that did not fully wash out. Capable. Her father's hands had looked the same way. Why, she said. Not aggressively, genuinely. Holt looked at his coffee cup. Your father fixed my bike once, he said, and he would not take payment for more than the parts. Said fixing a machine right was its own payment. He paused. I have met a lot of men who say things like that. Your father was the one who meant it the way it was supposed to mean it. He was quiet for a moment. When someone is that kind of person, what they leave behind matters. I came to see what he left, and I found this shop, and I found you. Nora felt something shift in her chest. The problem, she said, her voice quieter now, is that none of that closes the gap in 19 days. No, Holt said, but Calhoun Steed's fleet account might make a meaningful contribution. Nora almost laughed. It came out as something between a laugh and a sound she did not have a name for. He calls tomorrow, she said. Probably early, Holt said. He is an early riser. Holt set the repaired OBD reader on the bench and walked to the bay door. He stopped. There is something else, he said. Nora looked at him. The 3 men who came to your shop, I know who they are. I know who hired them specifically. And I know it is the 3rd time in 2 years they have been hired to do the same thing to a different small business. Nora went very still. The other businesses, she said. 2 of them closed, Holt said. One was a hardware store. One was a family restaurant. The 3rd, a landscaping company, is still open but never recovered to what it was. The owners never went to the police. They were afraid. And Hollis is careful. He uses distance. Enough separation between him and the people he hires that proving the connection requires more than a complaint. But you can prove it. Holt looked at her. I am working on making it possible for the right people to prove it, he said carefully. There is a difference and it matters. Nora understood. He was not law enforcement. He was something that had worked alongside and around law enforcement for decades and understood precisely where the lines were and how to move right up to them without crossing. When Nora said, "Not yet," Holt said, "but the pieces are almost where they need to be." He put on his helmet and walked toward the bay door. "Nora," he said, "they are going to try something before the mortgage payment date. Hollis is patient, but he is not infinitely patient. The calls to your suppliers and the pressure on your customers are not working fast enough for him. When patience runs out, people like him shift to faster methods." Nora felt the cold come into the room that had nothing to do with the weather. "How much time do I have?" "I do not know exactly," Holt said, "but I would say we are measuring in days, not weeks." He went out. Nora stood in the empty bay after the sound of the Harley faded and looked at the shop her father had built and thought about what Holt had said, about Ray, about the belt drive and the 4 hours and the charge only for parts, about a man passing through Harlan 15 years ago on a broken motorcycle and an afternoon that had meant nothing particular to anyone at the time. She thought about the hardware store and the restaurant. She thought about the owners who had been afraid and had no support and had closed. She thought about what it cost to lose something you had built honestly to someone who had no right to take it. She was not going to be one of those stories. She went to the office and sat at her father's desk and wrote down everything she could remember about the 3 men who had walked in with the tire iron. Every detail she had noticed and stored away. The specific way they moved. The exact words the broad one had used. The deliberate quality of the destruction. The mechanical shriek from the lift and what it told her about how the third man had sabotaged it. She wrote it in the precise, careful language of a mechanic documenting a problem accurately so it could be fixed properly. Then she sealed it in an envelope and wrote Holt's name on the outside and put it under the cash drawer in the register where she knew he would find it. Because she had decided that whatever was coming, whatever days they were actually measuring in, she was not going to wait for it. She was Ray Callahan's daughter. They did not wait for the problem to come to them. They figured out what it was, and they got to work. Calhoun Steed called at 7:40 in the morning exactly as Holt had said he would. Nora was under a Dodge Ram at the time, and she almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her roll out an answer, instinct. Or maybe just the accumulated understanding that in the current climate every call mattered. "Nora Callahan," she said, speaking. The voice on the other end was direct. No preamble. A man accustomed to making decisions quickly. "Calhoun Steed Construction out of Grover County. I had a conversation last week with a mutual acquaintance, Holt Mercer." "I know Holt," Nora said. "So he told me," Steed said. "He also told me you run the best shop in 100 miles and that your father built it on the principle that a machine fixed right is a machine that does not come back with a bigger problem." "That true. That is true," Nora said. "Good. I have got 15 vehicles in my fleet, 4 heavy-duty pickups, 3 flatbeds, 2 utility rigs, 6 work vans. Current shop I am using has been giving me 3-day turnarounds on jobs that should take 1. He paused. "I do not like 3-day turnarounds, Ms. Callahan. They cost me money I do not enjoy spending." "Bring them to me," Nora said. "One at a time or in groups, however, works for your schedule. I will tell you how long each job actually takes before I start it, and I will call you the moment it is done." Silence for 3 seconds. "Holt said you would say something like that," Steed said. She could hear in his voice the specific satisfaction of a man who has been told something and found it confirmed. "I will bring the first one Friday. I will be here." She hung up and stood in the bay and let herself feel it just for 30 seconds. The clean, uncomplicated fact of it. Then she went back under the Dodge. Friday. Calhoun Steed. 15 vehicles. It was not enough to close the gap completely. She ran the numbers in her head while she worked. But it was a bridge. It was a span of revenue that changed the geometry of the next 19 days in ways she could work with. She finished the differential, moved to the next car on the board, and kept going. The following Thursday was the day things broke open in a direction she had not expected. She was in the office at lunchtime reviewing the schedule for the following week when her phone rang with a number she did not recognize, a Billings area code. "Ms. Callahan, this is Agent Sandra Pruitt with the Montana Department of Justice Financial Crimes Unit." Nora set down the sandwich she had been eating. "All right," she said carefully. "I apologize for the unannounced call," Agent Pruitt said. "I understand you may be surprised to hear from us." Her voice was even and professional, with the practiced neutrality of someone who spent her working life having conversations that people were not prepared for. We have been conducting a preliminary inquiry into the business practices of a company called Summit Ridge Development. Your name has come up in that inquiry in connection with a property in Harlan County. Nora said nothing. She was thinking about Holt, about the shape of things. The pieces are almost where they need to be. Ms. Callahan, I am here, she said. I would like to meet with you in person if possible, Pruitt said, at a time and location of your choosing. There are questions I would like to ask and information I would like to share, and I think it would be beneficial for both parties. When Nora said, as soon as you are available, tomorrow if that works, Nora looked at the schedule. 3 cars in the morning, the afternoon technically full. 2 o'clock, she said, here at the shop. I will be there, Agent Pruitt said. Thank you, Ms. Callahan. Nora hung up and sat absolutely still for 30 seconds. Then she called Holt. He picked up on the second ring, which was unusual. He almost always let it ring longer, as if he needed time to decide whether the call was worth interrupting whatever he was doing. Agent Sandra Pruitt, Nora said. Financial Crimes Unit. She is coming here tomorrow at 2. A brief silence. Good, Holt said. You knew this was coming. I knew it was possible, he said. I am glad it came when it did. Before what, Nora said. Before it needed to come from a different direction, he said carefully. Nora understood what he was not saying. She pressed anyway. Holt, how much do you know about what Pruitt is investigating? Enough to know it is real, he said, and enough to know you should tell her everything you told me, everything you wrote in that envelope. Nora's hand tightened on the phone. You found the envelope. I found it, he said. It was thorough. You have a good eye for detail. My father taught me to document everything Nora said. He said a mechanic who cannot explain exactly what she found and what she did about it is not a mechanic you can trust. He was right, Holt said. Tell Pruitt the same things. Will you be there? A pause. No, Holt said. I do not think that would be helpful. This part needs to be yours. He hung up before she could ask what he meant by that, which she was fairly certain was intentional. Agent Sandra Pruitt arrived at 1:58 the following afternoon. She was younger than her voice had suggested. Early 40s, Nora guessed, with the kind of undemonstrative competence that read as experience rather than confidence. She wore civilian clothes and came alone and accepted the coffee Nora offered and sat across from her in the waiting area and opened a small notebook. She talked for the first 10 minutes. She told Nora that the Financial Crimes Unit had been conducting a preliminary inquiry into Summit Ridge Development for approximately 4 months. That the inquiry had been triggered by a complaint from a former employee who had seen enough of Hollis's internal operations to understand that the pattern of property acquisition was not clean. That the inquiry had subsequently identified a pattern across 3 counties involving at least 4 small businesses that had been subjected to various forms of pressure, economic, physical, and legal, prior to property transactions. 2 of those businesses had closed, Pruitt said. 1 had sold at below market value under duress. Only 1, a landscaping company, survived without selling, though barely. When she finished, Nora said the 3 men who came to my shop. Yes, Pruitt said. We are aware of that incident. We would like your account of it in detail. Nora told her. She told her everything in the precise mechanical language she had used when she wrote it down. The way they walked in, the specific words the broad man had used, the deliberate quality of the destruction, the explicit language about the building. She told her about the phone call from Hollis's representative on Friday evening. She told her about the suppliers being contacted, the man on the sidewalk, the 2 businesses whose owners had called to cancel after being told she was closing. Pruitt wrote steadily. You did not call police at the time, she said. Not accusatory, just noting it. I considered it, Nora said. But 3 men who break your equipment and say words that are not technically a threat in a county where Hollis has relationships at multiple levels of local administration. She stopped. I was not confident it would produce results that helped me. Pruitt looked up from her notebook. That is a reasonable assessment of the situation, she said. I will not tell you it is not. What changed, Nora said. Why is the state DOJ involved instead of county? Pruitt looked at her for a moment. An inquiry was formally requested by a third party about 6 weeks ago, she said. Someone who had compiled documentation on Summit Ridge's business practices across multiple counties and submitted it to the appropriate office with enough specificity to initiate a formal review. Nora looked at her. A third party, she said. The documentation was submitted anonymously, Pruitt said, but it was detailed enough to be immediately credible and it contained information we have since been able to independently verify. She paused. Whoever put it together knew what they were doing and knew what mattered legally. Nora felt something move through her, gratitude so large and so specific that she had to look away for a moment. 6 weeks ago, Holt had submitted that documentation 6 weeks ago, before the crowbar, before the phone calls to her suppliers, before any of what had happened in the last 3 weeks, which meant he had not simply responded to the attack. He had anticipated it. What do you need from me? Nora said. Your formal statement, Pruitt said. Everything you have told me on record. Any documentation you have records of the supplier calls the customer cancellations the property offer. She paused. And I would like to know if there are other business owners in the area who may have had similar experiences and may be willing to speak. Nora thought of Wade Kowalski, who had gotten that call, and felt ashamed enough to come in and apologize in person. She thought of the hardware store and the restaurant, the ones who had been afraid. I think there might be, she said. They talked for another 40 minutes. By the time Pruitt left, Nora had given her formal statement and agreed to sign documentation the following week and provided 2 names. Pruitt shook her hand at the bay door. Miss Callahan, she said, I want to be honest with you. This inquiry is real and it is serious, but these things move at their own pace. I cannot make promises about timelines. What I can tell you is that what you have given me today is significant. Significant enough to stop what is coming, Nora said. Pruitt looked at her steadily. What do you think is coming? I think Hollis is running out of patience, Nora said. And I think when men like that run out of patience, they stop being subtle. Pruitt held her gaze. I think you are right, she said, which is why I would like to move as quickly as we responsibly can. She paused. Be careful, Miss Callahan. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me directly. She handed Nora a card. That is my cell, not the office number. She left. Nora stood in the bay and looked at the card and thought about the timeline. 6 weeks ago, Holt had submitted that documentation. For any of this. He had not reacted to the attack. He had been preparing for it. And she had been in her shop every day since her father died, working, fighting, not knowing that someone was already positioning pieces on her behalf. She thought about what that cost a person. Not the obvious cost. The cost of caring that much about a thing you had no obligation to care about. She went back to work. The night it happened was 11 days after Agent Pruitt's visit. Nora had had a hard day in the way that good hard days are. The kind of hard that meant you had done more than you thought you could, and your body knew it. Calhoun Steed had brought the second of his fleet vehicles that afternoon, a heavy-duty flatbed with brake issues that turned out to be more extensive than either of them had anticipated. She had called him with the honest assessment the way she always did, and he had said, fix it right. I do not care how long it takes. I care that it is right. She had fixed it right. It had taken until almost 7. She was the last one in the shop. She finished the paperwork on the Steed flatbed and sat at the desk in the office and looked at the photograph of Ray and Ellen, her father young and grinning, her mother with her arm around him, both of them standing in front of the shop the year it opened, before Nora existed, before any of this existed. She sat with them for a moment. Then she heard the first vehicle, not a motorcycle, something heavier, a truck, maybe 2. She looked at the clock, 8:14. She got up from the desk slowly, the way you move, when you want to hear clearly before you are heard. She went to the bay door, the small side door, not the main roll-up, and looked out through the narrow window beside it. 2 trucks, black, late model, no markings, parked at angles across the parking lot entrance, and behind them on the edge of what the parking lot lights reached, she could see figures. She counted 8 before she stopped counting. Some of them were carrying things. She could not see clearly what. She did not need to. Her heart was going hard and fast, and she let it because the adrenaline was useful and the fear behind it was not. She called Pruitt. Pruitt answered on the second ring. They are here, Nora said. Her voice came out steady. She was surprised by that. How many? Pruitt said immediately. No wasted words. At least 8. Probably more. 2 trucks blocking the lot entrance. I am calling county now. Nora, do not engage. Stay inside and away from the windows. I am not going anywhere, Nora said. She hung up and thought about the next thing. The practical, problem-solving part of her mind that never fully went offline was running parallel to the fear, assessing options, measuring distances, calculating. She had a phone. She had tools. She had a commercial garage with 4 bays and solid walls her father had built on a concrete pad he poured himself on a Saturday in October, because he believed in doing the foundation right before anything else. She called Holt. 4 rings. 5. She felt the first cold finger of something she did not want to feel. The possibility that he would not answer. That for all his presence, all his quiet competence tonight, she was actually alone. He picked up. "They are here," she said. Same words she had said to Pruitt. Her voice still steady, though steady was costing her more now. Holt did not say anything for 2 seconds. "I know," he said. "I am already moving." His voice had something in it she had never heard before. Not urgency exactly, something under urgency. Something old and settled and absolutely without hesitation. "Nora, go to the center of the building. Stay away from the exterior walls. Do not come out until you hear me tell you it is clear." Then he said, "Go." She went. She positioned herself between the second and third bays away from the exterior walls exactly as he had said. She could hear things now. Voices outside, not loud. The sound of boots on gravel. Something metal against something metal. Someone issuing instructions she could not quite make out. She crouched between the 2 lifts with her phone in her hand and breathed. She heard the first roll-up bay door shutter. Someone hitting it from outside testing it. The side door rattled. Then something hit the exterior wall. A sound that reverberated through the whole building. Something heavy, deliberate, an announcement. Nora Callahan held her father's shop together in the only way available to her, which was by not moving and not making a sound, and trusting the walls Ray Callahan had built on a cold October Saturday 31 years ago. Then she heard it. 1 motorcycle engine, distant at first, coming from the north, from the direction of the highway, then 2. Then she stopped being able to count individual engines because there were too many. The sound built the way weather builds. You could feel it before it fully arrived. A vibration in the air that became a pressure, that became a roar. Not chaotic, not scattered, organized. The sound of many machines moving together in the specific coordinated way that said these people have done things together before. The voices outside the shop went quiet. Nora heard very clearly in the sudden silence someone say, "What the?" Then the engines began cutting off, one by one. Then in clusters. Then all at once, in a silence that was louder than the roar had been. The specific crushing silence of an enormous collective stillness. Nora did not move. She stayed exactly where she was and listened. She heard nothing for almost 30 seconds. Then she heard Holt's voice. Not raised, not angry. Completely level, carrying in the way that a voice carries when it does not need to compete with anything, because everything else has already decided to get out of its way. "You still have time to leave," he said. She heard nervous movement, shuffling, the sound of men recalculating. Then a voice she did not recognize performing the confidence of a man who was frightened and trying not to show it. "Who are you people?" Holt said nothing. The silence stretched. Then another voice, older, with the flat, unhurried vowels of someone who had grown up working outdoors. "Son," the voice said, "I have been riding since before your father was born, and I drove 400 miles to stand here tonight. You want to think hard about what that means." More shuffling, urgent whispers she could not make out. The sound of a truck door, and then boots retreating fast across gravel. Truck engines reversing. The specific sound of men leaving in a hurry, the kind of hurry that comes from having your certainty removed in a single instant. Nora stayed still until the truck engines faded completely. Then she heard Holt's footsteps across the parking lot unhurried, and she heard him speak to someone near him, not to the retreating men. "Get the plates on both trucks," he said. "Already got them," another voice said. Then Holt's voice at the side door. "Nora, it is clear." She stood up. Her legs felt strange. Not weak, just recalibrating. She walked to the side door and opened it. Holt was standing outside alone. Behind him, across the parking lot and along the road in both directions, she could see them. Motorcycles lined up with their engines off their riders standing beside them. Not arranged in any formal order, just present. Filling the road in both directions as far as she could see, in the parking lot lights and beyond, fading into the dark. She could not count them. She tried and gave up. Somewhere between 60 and 80, she estimated. Maybe more. Weathered faces, gray hair. The particular settled quality of people who have been serious about serious things for a long time and did not need to explain themselves or perform anything for anyone. She looked at Holt. He was watching the road where the trucks had gone. How Nora said, "I made calls," he said. "Told people what was happening. Told them where to be and when. How did you know when? Because I knew, Hollis Holt said. I knew the pressure was not working, and I knew what came after. I have seen it before. Nora looked out at the riders. Some of them were talking quietly in small groups. Some were just standing with their arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular. They came from all over, she said. Several states, Holt said. Because you called. Because of what I called about, he said. I told them an honest mechanic's shop was about to be destroyed by a man who had already done it twice to other people. I told them it was Ray Callahan's daughter. He paused. That was enough. From somewhere behind her, she heard a car. Official lights. County police had arrived. 2 cruisers, then 2 minutes behind them, an unmarked car she recognized as the one Pruitt had driven to the shop. Pruitt got out and looked at the road, at the motorcycles, at the riders. She stood and took in the full scope of it for a long moment. Then she walked to Nora. You okay? She said. Fine, Nora said. Pruitt looked at her with the measured gaze of a woman who had learned to read people quickly. You sure? Ask me tomorrow, Nora said. Tonight I am fine. Pruitt almost smiled. She turned to look at the assembled riders again, and then turned to Holt. I need to talk to whoever is in charge here, she said. Holt looked at Pruitt. We got the plates on both trucks, he said. The men carrying equipment had what appeared to be gasoline containers. If County got here fast enough, they may still be within range. He paused. There is also a phone call you should pull. 11 minutes ago from a cell phone registered to a property management company in Seattle that traces back to Grant Hollis to a number belonging to the lead man from the first incident at the shop. He paused again. I had someone monitoring communications. Pruitt stared at him. You had someone monitoring. She stopped. I am not going to ask how. That would probably be wise, Holt said. Pruitt looked at Nora. I'm going to need a full account from you tomorrow. Nora said I will come to you. Pruitt nodded and went to speak with the county officers. Nora turned back to Holt. The phone call, she said. You had someone tracking his communications the whole time. We had reason to believe he would make direct contact with those men when he realized the other pressure was not working, Holt said. Direct contact leaves evidence. I wanted evidence. You were setting him up. Not a trap exactly, Holt said in the same careful language he had used with her before, the language of a man who understood precisely what was his to do and what was not. But I was making it possible for the right people to have the right information at the right time. Nora looked at him. The other 2 businesses, she said. The hardware store and the restaurant. He did this to them and they closed. Why did nobody help them? She stopped. She knew the answer. Nobody had called Holt, or nobody who knew Holt had been watching, or the moment had passed before anyone understood what it was. That is why I came to this shop, he said, because I heard what was starting and I was not going to let it happen again. Nora stood very still. You knew, she said, when you started coming. You already knew Hollis was circling. I had an idea, Holt said. You came here to protect the shop. I came to meet you, he said, and then I decided the shop was worth protecting. The difference mattered. She felt it matter. Behind Holt, one of the riders had walked up. A woman which Nora had not expected, somewhere in her late 60s, with silver hair and the same quiet bearing as the rest of them. You are Nora Callahan, the woman said. Yes, Margaret Delray. I rode down from Missoula. She looked at Nora steadily. My husband knew Holt for 25 years. When Holt calls, you go. She paused. But I want you to know I would have come for Ray Callahan's daughter anyway if someone had thought to call. Did you know my father, Nora said. I met him once, Margaret said. 12 years ago, my bike broke down outside of Harley on a Sunday afternoon. Every shop in town was closed. I found this one and knocked on the locked door. Ray Callahan came out in his work clothes and fixed my bike in 40 minutes and refused payment. She paused. Men who do that are rare. Nora thought of Holt telling her the same story in different words. 15 years ago, a belt drive, 4 hours. Charge only for the parts. She thought of her father in his work clothes on a Sunday unlocking the shop for a stranger. She thought of Ray Callahan moving through the world without knowing, or perhaps knowing, exactly what he was leaving behind. Not a building, not a business. This crowd of people on a cold night in Montana who drove and rode from multiple states because of what a man had been. Because being known for doing things right had a reach that Ray Callahan had not lived to understand. But Nora understood it now. Thank you, she said to Margaret, for coming. Thank yourself, Margaret said. You are the one who stayed. She walked back to her bike. Nora stood in the parking lot while county officers took statements, and Pruitt worked her phone, and the riders gradually, without ceremony, began to start their engines and pull out in ones and twos. Some of them nodded at her as they passed. One old man with a beard gone fully white raised a hand without looking at her directly, the gesture of someone who has done a thing and considers it complete and does not need acknowledgement for it. By 10:30, the road was clear. The county vehicles were gone. Pruitt's car was gone. The parking lot was empty except for Holt's Harley and Nora's truck. Holt was leaning against the Harley with his arms crossed, looking at the shop. Nora walked out and stood beside him. "What happens to Hollis now?" she said. "Pruitt has the phone records," Holt said. "She has your statement and the statements from others you connected her with. She has the plate numbers from tonight, which are going to trace back to men who have done this before, which is going to trace back to whoever hired them." He paused. "And she has what I submitted 6 weeks ago." "What exactly did you submit?" Holt was quiet for a moment. "Financial records," he said. "Documented communications. A paper trail connecting Summit Ridge to the closure of the hardware store and the restaurant. Insurance claims Hollis filed on properties he acquired after the businesses on them closed under duress." He paused. "Insurance fraud, extortion, organized intimidation across multiple counties." Nora stared at him. "How did you get financial records?" "I know people," he said simply. "People who know how to find things that are meant to be hidden, and people who know how to present what they find to the parties who can act on it legally. Retired people." "Mostly," Holt said. "He is done," Nora said, not a question. "He is going to wish he had never heard of Harlan County." Holt said, "That is what I believe." Nora looked at the shop, the 4 bays her father had built, the exterior walls that had held tonight against men with gasoline and the confidence of people who believed money meant immunity. "My mortgage payment is in 8 days, she said. "Calhoun paid his invoice early," Holt said. "I called him yesterday and told him what was happening and asked if he would consider it. He said he would have a check here in the morning." Nora looked at him sideways. "You called him?" "I may have mentioned the situation," Holt said. "In passing." Nora laughed. It came out real and full and completely without warning. The first full laugh she had produced in longer than she could accurately calculate, and it felt like something physical being released from her chest. Holt looked at her, and she saw it for just a moment. The thing behind the gray eyes, the thing he kept carefully managed. The deep, specific satisfaction of a man who has done something he believes in and is watching it take the shape he hoped for. "Go home, Nora," he said. "Lock the shop. Sleep." "You will be here Wednesday," she said. "I will be here Wednesday," he said. He started the bike. The engine turned over with the particular settled rumble of a machine that has been maintained with care, that has covered enough miles to know its own rhythms. Nora watched him ride out of the parking lot and onto the highway, the single taillight getting smaller and then disappearing around the long curve north. She turned and looked at the shop one final time. The exterior walls were unmarked. The bays were intact. The sign her father had put up 31 years ago, "Callahan Family Auto Repair," red letters on white, straightforward and unpretentious, was exactly where it had always been. She went inside and turned off the lights and locked the doors and set the alarm. And when she walked to her truck, she felt the 8 days ahead of her, not as a countdown to something terrible, but as a stretch of time in which she was going to work and good people were going to help her. And a man who had decided her shop was worth protecting had made sure that protecting it was possible. She did not know yet what morning would bring, but she knew she would be back at 6:30. She knew the coffee would be made by 6:15. And she knew that somewhere on the highway heading north, a man in a faded denim jacket was riding home on a vintage Harley, and that next Wednesday he would park in the usual spot and come inside and accept the coffee she poured before she heard the engine and sit in the usual chair and look at nothing in particular with those quiet gray eyes. And that was enough for tonight. It was exactly enough. Calhoun Steed's check arrived at 8:15 the next morning, hand-delivered by Calhoun himself, who drove the 30 miles from Grover County in his personal truck and walked into the shop with the envelope before Nora had finished her first cup of coffee. He did not make a production of it. He set the envelope on the counter and said early payment. "Holt mentioned you had a deadline coming." Then he looked around the shop with the evaluating eyes of a man who spent his professional life assessing whether equipment and people could handle what he needed from them. "Place looks solid," he said. "My father built it to last," Nora said. "So I hear." Calhoun picked up the coffee she offered without being asked, which told her something about the kind of man he was, comfortable enough in working spaces to not stand on ceremony. "I also hear you had some excitement last night." Some, Nora said. Calhoun looked at her over the coffee cup. You all right getting there? She nodded, accepting this as a complete answer, because it was. He finished the coffee and set the cup down and said the flatbed runs better than it has in 2 years. My driver noticed it on the first trip out this morning. He paused. I am bringing the second rig next Tuesday, and I would like to talk to you about putting Callahan Auto on retainer for the whole fleet. Monthly rate priority scheduling, dedicated contact number. He looked at her steadily. If that works for you. Nora looked at this man who had driven 30 miles before 8 in the morning to hand deliver a check and was now offering her exactly the kind of stable commercial account that could change the financial structure of the shop in a single conversation. That works for me, she said. Calhoun Steed shook her hand and left. Nora held the envelope for a moment before opening it. Then she opened it, looked at the number, and felt something in her chest do a slow, careful rearrangement. The number did not close the gap entirely, but it changed the geometry of the next 8 days from impossible to very difficult, which in Nora Callahan's current vocabulary was approximately the same as a clear road. She put the check in the deposit envelope, finished her coffee, and opened the shop. Agent Pruitt called at noon. The plates from last night, she said without preamble. Both trucks registered to a shell company in Nevada. Company traces to a man named Curtis Doyle, who has 2 prior arrests for aggravated intimidation in Oregon and 1 in Idaho, neither of which resulted in prosecution because the witnesses declined to testify. She paused. We have identified Doyle as the man who led the group last night. We are also fairly confident he was the broad man at your shop 3 weeks ago. You are arresting him, Nora said. We have a warrant, Pruitt said. We are executing it this afternoon, and Nora... She paused. We have also obtained a warrant for Grant Hollis. Nora sat down. When she said, today, Pruitt said, both warrants execute today. Another pause. I wanted you to know before it became public. You have been central to this, and you deserve to hear it first. What are the charges? For Doyle and his associates, Pruitt said organized intimidation, destruction of property, conspiracy to commit arson given the gasoline containers last night. For Hollis. She paused, and Nora could hear in that pause the particular satisfaction of a careful person about to say something they have been working toward for a long time. Extortion across multiple counties. Insurance fraud on 3 separate property transactions. Conspiracy to commit property destruction and criminal facilitation of attacks on at least 3 businesses. We are still building the complete picture, but what we have is solid. The documentation, Nora said. The anonymous submission combined with your statement and physical evidence from last night, Pruitt said. The submission was the foundation, everything else built on it. Nora thanked her and hung up and sat in her father's office. The room was quiet. She looked at nothing in particular for a long moment, not the desk or the notepad or the numbers on the schedule. Just the quiet, just the room that still felt like his. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and called Holt. He answered on the 3rd ring. Pruitt told me, she said. I heard Holt said. Were you surprised? Number. Were you satisfied? A pause longer than usual. Ask me when it is finished, he said. Arrests are not convictions. Pruitt seems confident. Pruitt should be, Holt said. The case is solid, but I have seen solid cases take unexpected turns, and I do not celebrate until there is something permanent to celebrate. Nora absorbed this. It was the most cautious she had heard him since the night in the parking lot. And the caution itself told her something. That this mattered to him in a way that went beyond the practical. In a way, he was managing carefully because he did not fully trust himself to be objective about it. She thought about the hardware store, the restaurant, the owners who had closed and moved and been afraid. Holt, she said, the other 2 businesses, the hardware store and the restaurant. Why did nobody help them before it was too late? Because nobody called me, he said quietly. Or nobody who knew me was watching when it happened. Or the moment passed before anyone understood what it was. He was quiet for a moment. That is what I came to this shop for, he said, because I had seen it happen twice and I understood what it looked like at the beginning, and I was not going to watch it happen a 3rd time if there was anything I could do. Nora closed her eyes. You have been carrying this for a long time, she said. Some things are worth carrying, Holt said, until you can put them down properly. He was quiet again. How is the shop? He said. Nora almost smiled. The question, direct and practical, the return to what could be measured, was so entirely Holt that it cut through everything else like a clean line. The shop is good, she said. Calhoun Steed's retainer starts next month. The mortgage payment is going to the bank on Friday. She paused. "The shop is good, Holt." "Good," he said. "I will see you Wednesday." He hung up. The news of Grant Hollis's arrest moved through Harlan County the way news moved in small towns, fast and precise in some details and entirely accurate in the essential ones. By 4 in the afternoon, Nora had received calls from 8 people. 3 were customers expressing support. 2 were local business owners she barely knew, thanking her for something she was not sure she had done. 1 was from the loan officer at First Montana Bank, who said he would like to revisit the refinancing conversation at her earliest convenience, in a tone that suggested earliest convenience meant as soon as she was willing to walk through his door. 1 call was from a reporter at the Harlan County Gazette who wanted a comment. "The shop is open," Nora said. "We do good work. Come in if you need your car fixed." The reporter laughed. "That is it." "That is it," Nora said. She hung up. The last call came from a Wyoming area code she did not recognize. The voice was a woman in her late 60s with a careful, deliberate way of speaking that suggested she was choosing each word precisely. "Miss Callahan, my name is Helen Marsh. I do not think we have met." A brief pause. "My son owned the restaurant on Birch Street in Harlan, the one that closed about 18 months ago." Nora went still. "I know which one," she said carefully. "My son moved to Wyoming after it closed," Helen said. "He does not like to talk about what happened. It broke something in him, Ms. Callahan. Not the losing of the business exactly, the helplessness of it, the feeling of being pressed on all sides with no way to push back." She paused. "He heard about the arrest today. He called me from Wyoming. He was crying." Another pause. "I want you to know that what you did refusing to move, staying in that shop, it gave him something back. I do not know what to call it exactly. Something he thought was gone." Nora found she could not speak for a moment. "Ms. Callahan." "I am here," she said. "I am sorry about your son's restaurant," Nora said. "So am I," Helen said. "But I am glad something good came from it, even if it came late." She paused one more time. "Your father would be very proud." She hung up. Nora sat with the phone in her hand for a full minute. Then she put it down and sat very still and let the weight of it land where it needed to land. Then she picked up the next work order on the board and went back to work. Grant Hollis entered his plea on a Thursday morning in November in a Billings courtroom that was quieter than Nora had expected. She had driven up the night before and stayed in a motel off the interstate, and she had not slept well. She lay in the dark and listened to the highway outside and thought about the months behind her. The way she sometimes ran through a complicated repair in her head before starting it, mapping each step, each decision, each moment, where it could have gone differently. She had almost given up. Not seriously, not for long, but there had been one night in early October, about a week before Calhoun Steed called, when she had sat at her father's desk and looked at the numbers and felt the specific, exhausted despair of a person who has been fighting hard for a long time and cannot see the end of it. She had sat with that feeling for maybe 20 minutes. Then she had gotten up and locked the shop and driven home and made herself eat something and gone to sleep. In the morning, she had gone back. Lying in the motel dark, she understood that those 20 minutes had been the closest Hollis ever actually came to winning. Not the men with the crowbar. Not the trucks in the parking lot with the gasoline containers. 20 minutes of private despair in a locked office that nobody ever knew about. She had not told Holt about that night. She thought she might tell him someday. The courtroom was small and procedural. Hollis's attorney did most of the talking in the careful, measured language of managing a situation rather than arguing one. Hollis himself sat with the contained inward quality of a man who had decided exactly how much of himself to show and had settled on very little. He was 52, younger than Nora had somehow imagined, with the kind of surface polish that came from money and the practice of appearing confident in every room. He did not look at her. She sat in the gallery and watched him and understood that to Grant Hollis, she had never been a person. She had been an obstacle, then an inconvenience, then a problem that required escalating solutions. The idea that she might be someone's daughter, that the building he wanted sat on 31 years of a family's life, had simply not registered as relevant data. That Nora thought was his actual failure. Not getting caught. Failing to understand what he was dealing with before it was too late to recalculate. The plea was entered. Hollis pleaded guilty to extortion, conspiracy, and 2 counts of criminal facilitation. The financial fraud charges were consolidated. Sentencing would come in 60 days. His cooperation agreement required him to provide testimony and documentation regarding 2 associates in other counties who had been operating similar schemes. It took 45 minutes. Nora drove back to Harlan County in the early afternoon and opened the shop at 2 and finished 3 jobs before closing. She called Holt from the parking lot before she drove home. "It is done," she said. A pause. "Good," Holt said. "You were right," Nora said. "It was not a trial. It was not a public reckoning." "No," Holt said, "but it was permanent." "It was permanent," Nora said. She sat in her truck and looked at the shop sign. Callahan Family Auto Repair. Red letters on white. And felt the specific, quiet satisfaction of a thing completed. Not triumph, completion. The feeling of a job finished correctly. Bev Archer came to Harlan County on a Saturday in December. Not to reopen the hardware store, not immediately, but she came back. She drove into town and walked into Callahan Auto because Nora had called her the week before and told her there was coffee if she wanted it and no obligation to talk about anything she did not want to talk about. Bev was 61, compact and precise in her movements, with the manner of someone who had built something from nothing and knew exactly what that cost. She sat in the waiting area and drank her coffee and looked at the photograph of Ray Callahan on the wall. "I remember your father," she said. "He came to the hardware store the month we opened, bought a set of drill bits, and told me the place was going to do well. Just said it like it was a fact." She paused. "It was the most straightforward encouragement I ever got from a stranger." "That sounds like him," Nora said. "I have been afraid to come back here," Bev said. "Not of Hollis. He is done. I have been afraid of what it would feel like to drive down Birch Street and see the building." "Is it what you expected?" Nora said. Bev looked at her coffee cup. "Worse," she said. "And better. Worse because it is still standing and I am not in it, and that is just a fact I have to live with. Better because it is still standing, and maybe that means something." "Does it mean you might reopen?" Bev was quiet for a long moment. "Gerald Hatch called me," she said. "He was one of the suppliers who had quietly pulled back when Hollis made his calls and who had come to the shop weeks later with a written apology and an offer to restore Nora's account on better terms than before. He said he would extend favorable terms to get me started again. And a woman named Patricia Grange organized a community letter, 37 signatures, people who said they would bring their business to a reopened store." She looked at Nora. "Did you put them up to that?" "No," Nora said honestly. Bev looked at the photograph of Ray Callahan again. "This town," she said quietly. Not in exasperation, in something closer to wonder. "I know," Nora said. Bev left 2 hours later. 3 weeks after that, she called Nora and said she was coming back to Harlan. She had signed a lease on the old hardware store building. The owner had offered her favorable terms upon hearing why she had left in the first place. Bev Archer's hardware was going to reopen in the spring. Nora heard the news and went and stood in the bay alone for a minute, just standing there, feeling the shape of something she did not have words for. The sense that what had happened in this shop over the past months had consequences she was still only beginning to understand. That the ripple of one woman refusing to move was still traveling outward in directions she could not fully trace. She went back to work. In February, Nora hired her first mechanic. His name was Tanner Webb. 24 years old, just finished his trade program at the community college in Billings, looking for somewhere to learn from someone who cared about doing it right. He was quick and eager in the way of young people who have found the work they are actually suited for. He made mistakes with the transparency of someone who understood that mistakes were how you learned if you let them be. Nora corrected him the way her father had corrected her. Directly, without drama, with the explanation attached. "The reason you torque it in sequence," she told him 3 weeks in when he had rushed a head gasket replacement, "is not because the manual says so. It is because the metal expands unevenly if you do not. And in 6 months, your customer comes back with a warped head and no idea why." She paused. "You want your customers to come back because they trust you, not because you created the problem." Tanner looked at her. "Your dad taught you that." "My dad taught me everything worth knowing about this work," Nora said. "And most of what is worth knowing about most other things." Tanner nodded. He retorqued the sequence correctly. He never rushed a head gasket again. Holt came every Wednesday through December and into the new year. The conversations changed not in tone but in texture. Less urgency, more of the easiness that comes when the pressure is off, and what is left, it is two people who have been through something together finding out what they are to each other in the absence of crisis. Nora learned things about him slowly, the way you learn things about a person who reveals himself through what he does rather than what he says. She learned that he had ridden with the Iron Wolves for nearly 30 years, that he had grown up in eastern Montana in a family with not much money and a high premium on self-sufficiency, that he had a house outside of Great Falls with a garage that contained 3 motorcycles and a workbench that was, by his own admission, better organized than most people's lives. She learned that he cooked, really cooked, and that he had opinions about cast iron that he expressed with the same quiet certainty he expressed everything else. She learned that he had never married, not from absence of opportunity, but from the specific way some people are made complete in themselves, not diminished by solitude, and clear-eyed enough about their own nature to understand what a partnership with them would require. She learned that he had been doing versions of what he had done for her quietly without announcement for a long time, that there were several small businesses in 2 states that were still open because of conversations Holt had had, and calls Holt had made, and documentation Holt had compiled and submitted through appropriate channels. He did not list them. She assembled the picture gradually from things he said in passing. "Do you think of it as a mission?" she asked him once on a cold Wednesday in January, when the shop was quiet and the coffee was particularly good. He thought about it. "No," he said. "I think of it as paying attention to what is worth keeping, and to what it costs when nobody bothers." Nora looked at him. "You have been paying attention a long time," she said. "Long enough to know it matters," he said. "Short enough that it still surprises me sometimes when things go right." He paused. "I take that as a good sign." There was a Wednesday in early June when Holt arrived, and something was different. Nora noticed it when he walked in. Not in anything obvious, in the specific quality of how he moved. A deliberateness that was slightly more deliberate than usual, as if he were paying more attention to each step than he normally needed to. She did not say anything. She poured the coffee and sat across from him and waited. He drank half the cup before he spoke. "I have been having some trouble," he said. Nora kept her voice level. "What kind of trouble?" "Health trouble," he said. He said it the way he said everything, directly, without softening, but also without drama. "My heart. Nothing sudden. The kind of thing that has been building for a while, and that I have been mostly ignoring because I do not enjoy thinking about it." Nora looked at him. "How long have you known?" "Suspected for about a year," he said. "Known for certain for about 4 months. 4 months, since February, since before Bev Archer had come back to Harlan, since before Tanner had learned not to rush a head gasket. Holt had been sitting in this waiting area every Wednesday for 4 months, carrying something he had not said a word about. "What are you doing about it?" Nora said. "A doctor in Great Falls," he said. "Medication, some adjustments to how I live." He paused. "I am not dying tomorrow, Nora. I want to be clear about that. I am not building to a dramatic announcement." "Then what are you building to?" He looked at his coffee cup. "I am building to telling you that I will not always be able to come on Wednesdays," he said. "And I wanted you to know why in advance rather than have it be something you wondered about." Nora held the weight of this, the specific practical kindness of it. The man who gave almost nothing away voluntarily choosing to give her this because the alternative was the silence of absence, which would be worse. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You are not going to try to fix it," he said. "It is not a car," she said. He almost smiled. "No," he said, "it is not." He finished his coffee and sat for a while longer than usual. They talked about Tanner and the fleet account and Bev Archer's hardware store, which had reopened in April, to what Bev described as embarrassingly good turnout. They talked about the road, which Holt said he was still riding, doctors' mild objections notwithstanding. They talked about very little and sat comfortably in the space between what was said and what did not need to be. Before he left, Holt stood at the bay door the way he sometimes did and looked at the shop. "Your father would have loved what you have done with it," he said. "I have not done anything dramatic," Nora said. "It looks almost the same." "I know," Holt said. "That is what I mean." He left. The Wednesdays became less regular after that. Some weeks he came. Some weeks a Wednesday passed with no sound of the Harley in the parking lot, and Nora let it pass and did not call unless 2 weeks went by without hearing from him. He came in late August for the first time in 3 weeks, and Nora poured his coffee without comment and sat across from him and looked at him clearly and saw what she saw. He was thinner. The deliberateness in his movement was more pronounced, but his eyes were exactly the same clear, complete attention. The same quality of being fully present in the space he occupied. "The Harley is running well," he said. "You brought it in July," Nora said. "Tanner serviced it. He did a good job," Holt said. "I told him so." "He was pleased," Nora said. He tried not to show it. Holt nodded approvingly. Good instinct. Nora looked at him. Holt, she said. Nora, he said, in the same tone. Is there anything you need, she said. Anything at all. I mean that the way you meant it to me. He looked at her for a moment. No, he said. I have what I need. You are sure? I have been taking care of myself for a long time, he said. I know what I need. Nora accepted this. Then come when you can, she said. The coffee will be ready. I know it will, he said. He came 3 more times that fall. The last time was in October on a Wednesday that was cold and bright in the way of Montana October. The sky a specific shade of blue that only appeared after the first hard frost. He sat for almost 2 hours, longer than he had ever sat. He drank 2 cups of coffee and watched the shop work around him. Tanner moving through the bays, Nora on the phone with Calhoun Steed about scheduling, Wade Kowalski dropping off the first of his rigs for its fall inspection. The ordinary functional life of a working garage on an ordinary Wednesday. Holt said almost nothing for the 2 hours. When he stood to leave, Nora walked to the bay door with him. He put on the helmet with the deliberateness that was familiar now that she had learned to read without comment. He started the bike. Then he looked at her through the visor, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything because neither of them needed to. He pulled out of the parking lot and turned north toward Great Falls, and she watched the tail light diminish and disappear around the long curve in the highway. She stood in the doorway for a moment after he was gone. Then she went back inside. Holt Mercer died on a Tuesday in December in Great Falls, with the specific quietness of a man who had always been more comfortable with actions than words, and managed his own ending with the same economy he managed everything else. He was 73 years old. Nora heard from Dylan Boone, who called her on Wednesday morning. He asked me to call you, Dylan said. Made me promise months ago. Nora sat down in the chair in her father's office and breathed. Thank you, Dylan, she said. She was quiet for a moment. Was it peaceful, she said. As peaceful as Holt ever was about anything, Dylan said, which means he was calm and direct, and he did not make a fuss. A pause. He was asking about the shop the day before, whether Tanner was working out. Nora pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment. Tanner is working out, she said. That is what I told him, Dylan said. He seemed satisfied. She closed the shop for the day. She had never closed the shop for any reason other than major holidays. She did it now without hesitation because there are things that matter more than keeping the bays running, and knowing which things those are was something her father had taught her. She drove to Great Falls. She sat with Dylan Boone and 2 other men she had seen in her parking lot on the night that mattered, and they drank coffee and talked about Holt in the way that people talk about someone who was genuinely himself for his entire life, with the specific mixture of admiration and affection that comes from knowing a person who never pretended to be anything other than what they were. She learned things she had not known, that Holt had ridden with the Iron Wolves for 28 years, that in those years he had been involved in things that were serious in ways she had understood without knowing the specifics, that in his retirement he had developed what Dylan described as a particular attention to independent owners being squeezed by larger interests, a pattern he had recognized and decided to do something about in whatever way was available to him. He had a list, Dylan told her, not written down, in his head, places he was watching, situations that were developing. He had been watching your situation for almost 2 years before he started coming to the shop. Nora looked at Dylan. 2 years, she said. He said your father's shop was the kind of place Montana could not afford to lose, Dylan said, and that it was going to need help it did not know it needed yet. Nora thought about Holt 2 years ago, watching from a distance, tracking a predator's movements, positioning himself, and then walking into a shop on a Wednesday afternoon with a Harley that did not need servicing, and sitting down in the waiting area and drinking 1 cup of black coffee and deciding that, yes, this was the place, and yes, this was worth his time. She drove back to Harlan County the next morning and opened the shop at 6:30. She found the envelope 2 weeks later. It was in the mail, forwarded through a Great Falls attorney's office, postmarked 3 months earlier. Holt had arranged it before he died, had arranged everything before he died because that was how he approached things. The envelope contained a single document and a handwritten note on a plain index card. The document was a mortgage release from First Montana Bank. The final balance on Callahan Family Auto Repair, paid in full. Nora sat at her father's desk and looked at the document for a long time. The number on it was not small. It represented something Holt had done quietly through the attorney's office, without telling her, without giving her the chance to refuse it because he had known she would refuse it. She turned to the index card. His handwriting was the way she would have expected it to be. Direct, clear, no unnecessary flourishes. Shops can be rebuilt. Engines can be repaired. But courage must always stay open for business. Nora sat at her father's desk in her father's office with the document and the index card in her hands, and she let herself feel the full weight of it. Not just what Holt had done, but what it meant. The specific and irreversible generosity of a man who had decided that something was worth protecting and had protected it completely right to the very end in every way available to him. She cried. She did it quietly with the door closed the way her father had taught her, not suppressing it, not ashamed of it, just keeping it private because some things belong only to you. Then she washed her face and went back into the bay. Tanner looked up from the engine he was working on. "You okay?" he said. "Getting there," Nora said. "Anything I can do?" Nora looked at him. This young man she had spent months teaching, who had learned to torque in sequence and to give the reason with the correction and to take pride in work done right even when nobody was watching. "Finish that valve cover," she said, "and do it right." "Always," Tanner said. She went back to work. The shop grew through the rest of that winter and into the spring. Not dramatically. Nora was not interested in dramatic growth which required capital she did not have and management complexity she did not want. She was interested in sustainable growth, the kind her father had practiced, the kind that built something real over time rather than something impressive over a short time. By March, she had the Steed Fleet contract humming smoothly, and Wade Kowalski had referred two other small trucking operations that were looking for what Kowalski now described to people as the most reliable shop in 3 counties. Patricia Grange had sent her sister and her sister's husband and mentioned the shop to 4 people at her church. Word moved the way word moved when it was backed by actual experience rather than advertising. Tanner grew into his position the way a young mechanic grows when someone takes the time to explain not just the how, but the why. By April, he could diagnose a transmission problem in the time it had taken him to find his tools in February. He still made mistakes. He made them openly and corrected them completely, which Nora recognized as the most important skill a mechanic could have after the mechanical ones. She told him so one afternoon when he came to her with a brake job he had done wrong and wanted to redo on his own time at no charge to the customer. "You could have said nothing," she said. "The customer probably would not have noticed for months." Tanner looked at her. "But you would have noticed," he said. She would have. She had noticed before he told her actually, which was why she had been watching him when he came to find her. But that was not the point. "The point is that you noticed," she said, "and you came to me. That is how this shop has always worked." Tanner nodded. He redid the brake job. The customer came back 6 weeks later with an oil change and a referral. Some things were beginning to feel not easy. Exactly nothing about running a one-person shop with 1 employee and a full commercial account was easy but settled. The daily work had its own rhythm again, the rhythm Nora remembered from her father's shop when she was young, when the problems were just mechanical and the question of whether the shop would still be there tomorrow was not something anyone needed to ask. She thought about that rhythm sometimes when she was under a vehicle, when the work was going well and her hands knew what to do without her mind needing to direct them. She thought about Ray Callahan in these same bays making the same diagnostic calculations with the same tools, and she understood more deeply than she ever had when he was alive what it meant to him to be here. Not the business of it, not even the craftsmanship of it, though that was real and important. The specific dignity of being a person who could fix things, who understood how things worked and could make them work again, who people brought their broken things to because they knew those things would come back right. She understood that now in a way she had not understood it before the crowbar, and the crowbar's aftermath had stripped everything else away and left just this, the core of it, the reason any of it mattered. In May, Wade Kowalski stopped by not for service but for coffee and sat in the waiting area and looked at the photograph of Ray Callahan on the wall for a while before he said what he had come to say. "I have been thinking about that call I got from Summit Ridge," he said, "about why I believed it without checking with you first." "You explained that," Nora said. "I know I did." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I want to say something different." He paused. "I believed it because it sounded like the kind of thing that happens to good people who are working alone. Because I had seen it before. Because I thought there she is by herself and Hollis has lawyers and money and he will just grind her down." He looked at her. "I was wrong about what you were by yourself," he said. That is what I wanted to say. Nora looked at him. You were not wrong about what I was, she said. I was alone. I was scared. Most mornings I did not know if I was going to make it. Then how? Nora thought about it. I kept the doors open, she said, and I did not flinch. That is what Holt told me to do, and I did not have anything better. Wade was quiet for a moment. Simple, he said. Not easy, Nora said. Simple is different from easy. Wade nodded. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. Ray used to say that, he said. Simple is different from easy. Nora smiled. Yes, she said. He did. The first anniversary came in September. The anniversary of the night the trucks had come to the parking lot. The night that had changed the structure of what Nora understood was possible. She did not plan anything for it. She opened the shop at 6:30 and worked through the day the way she always did. At 4 in the afternoon, she heard the first motorcycle, then the second. She walked to the bay door and looked out. They filled the parking lot. They filled the road in front of the shop. They came from both directions, and they parked with the unhurried coordination of people who had been to this place before and knew how to occupy it without crowding it. Weathered faces and gray hair, and the particular settled quality of people who had decided something was worth their time and did not need to explain why. Dylan Boone was in front. He climbed off his bike and walked to Nora. We figured we would come back, he said, if that is all right. Nora looked at the crowd behind him. The road was full in both directions further than she could see clearly. 83 riders. She counted them later when she had the time. It is more than all right, she said. Her voice was steady. It cost her something. What is this, she said. Dylan reached into his jacket and handed her a folded paper. Holt had the idea about 6 months ago, he said. Annual ride on Harlan County as the starting point. Proceeds go to a fund supporting family-owned repair shops facing unfair economic pressure. He wrote up the structure before he died, left it with the attorney. He had already raised the seed money. He paused. He named it. Nora looked at him. What did he name it? Dylan nodded at the paper in her hands. She opened it. The Ray Callahan Fund for Independent Business. Nora looked at the paper for a long time. She thought about her father in his work clothes on a Sunday afternoon, unlocking a shop that was supposed to be closed for a stranger who needed help. About Holt riding a broken motorcycle into the nearest open bay 15 years ago, and a man who would not take payment for 4 hours of work because fixing a machine right was its own payment. About what it meant that those 4 hours had led here, to this road, to these people, to a fund that carried her father's name. She thought about what Ray Callahan had built. Not the 4 bays and the concrete pad poured on a cold October Saturday. Not the tools hung in their places on the pegboard walls or the green ledger with the customer list written in his handwriting. The other thing, the thing underneath the building, the 31 years of fixing things right and charging honestly and staying open when it would have been easier to close. The thing that had no name on any deed, but that was as real and as durable as the concrete itself. She thought about how that thing had extended outward in directions Ray had never seen and could not have predicted and would have found entirely unsurprising. She looked up at Dylan. He never stopped, she said. No, Dylan said he did not. Nora folded the paper carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. She walked to the edge of the parking lot and stood where she could see the road in both directions, lined with riders who had come from multiple states, for a man who would have told them they were making too much of it, for a shop that was still standing, for the idea that honest work deserved to be protected by people who understood its value. Margaret Delray was there, the woman from Missoula with the silver hair who had ridden down the previous September and told Nora she would have come anyway. She nodded at Nora from across the parking lot with the brief nod of someone who does not need to say things that have already been understood. An older man Nora did not recognize climbed off a bike near the edge of the lot and stood there with his arms folded, looking at the shop sign the way someone looks at something they have been told about and are now confirming for themselves. He had a white beard and hands that looked like they had spent 60 years doing physical work. He did not speak to anyone for a long time. Then he said to no one in particular, "That is a good sign." Just said it quietly and nodded and went back to looking. Nora stood there and let herself see it completely. Not quickly, not with her mind already on the next job. She looked at every part of it, the motorcycles and the riders, and the Montana sky above the highway, and the sign her father had put up 31 years ago. Red letters on white. Weathered now, the paint had faded some at the edges, but solid, exactly where it had always been. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned and went inside and poured herself a coffee and stood at the workbench where she had always stood, and she thought about Holt Mercer in his Wednesday chair. And she thought about Ray Callahan unlocking the door for a stranger on a Sunday afternoon. And she thought about all the invisible things that pass between people when one of them decides to do right and the other decides to pay attention. Strong people, Holt had told her once, do not exist to rule others. They are here so honest people do not have to stand alone. Nora Callahan had not known when she told three men to get out of her father's shop on a rainy September evening that she was doing anything more than refusing to move. She had not known about Holt's 2 years of watching, or his 30 years of earning trust, or the 83 riders on the highway, or the envelope with the mortgage release, or the fund that bore her father's name. She had only known one thing clearly in that moment, with her voice barely above a whisper and her hands free: that this was her father's shop, that it was built right, and that some things, the things that matter, the things that are honest and earned and real, are not for sale at any price by any threat to any man who mistakes the ability to apply pressure for the right to take what belongs to someone else. She set down her coffee. She picked up the next work order on the board. Callahan Family Auto Repair was open for business, and it was going to stay that way. The months that followed the annual ride moved with the specific productive momentum of a situation that has been released from the pressure that was deforming it. The shop breathed differently. That was the only way Nora could describe it to herself. The anxiety that had been a constant low frequency in the background of every working day, the question of whether this was going to be the week the numbers finally stopped working, was gone. Not because everything was easy. Running a shop was never easy. But the question itself was gone, and without it, the work had a different quality. Cleaner. More like what it was supposed to be. Tanner turned out to be better than Nora had initially estimated. He had the quality she valued most in a mechanic after competence, which was the willingness to say when he did not know something. He would come to her with a diagnosis he was not certain of and say, I think it is this, here is my reasoning, but I want you to look at it before I go further. That habit of checking, of treating his own conclusions as provisional until confirmed, was not something you could teach easily. Either a person had it or they did not. Tanner had it. By the following spring, she was leaving him to run the shop solo for half days, which she had not expected to be able to do for at least another year. She used those half days for things she had been putting off for months: supplier conversations, the bookkeeping backlog, a few customer calls she owed. She used some of the time to sit in the office and look at the numbers without urgency, the way you look at a machine after it has been repaired and is running correctly. Just confirming that what you see matches what you expected to see. The numbers looked the way they were supposed to look. She allowed herself to feel that for a few minutes. Then she went back to work. Calhoun Steed's fleet contract had stabilized into a reliable monthly rhythm. He brought vehicles in on a schedule, he paid on time, and when she told him something was going to take longer than expected, he said fine and meant it. He had sent two other contractors her way, men he knew from job sites who needed a shop they could count on for their work vehicles. Both of them had become regular accounts. Wade Kowalski's 3 rigs came in quarterly for inspections and more often when something needed attention. Wade had a habit of calling when he heard the first hint of something not quite right, rather than waiting until it became a problem, which Nora appreciated in the way she appreciated any customer who understood that a small problem addressed early was less expensive than a large problem addressed late. Patricia Grange sent people from her church, from her neighborhood, from what appeared to be an extensive network of people who trusted her judgment on matters ranging from contractors to physicians to auto mechanics. Patricia herself came in every 3 months with her Buick and sat in the waiting area and drank coffee, and sometimes talked to other customers in the way that natural connectors do, drawing people into conversation without effort and leaving them feeling that they had made an acquaintance worth having. Nora watched her do this one afternoon and thought about what her father had said about the shop being a place. Not a business exactly, a place where people's lives touched briefly around the specific need of a working machine, and where the quality of that brief touching, the honesty of the work, and the fairness of the dealing, and the reliability of the outcome determined whether the touching was something they wanted to repeat. Ray had understood that, and he had built this place to be that kind of place for 31 years. Nora was continuing that. She was not inventing it. She was maintaining it the way you maintain a machine that was built right to begin with care and consistency and attention to the things that matter. The Ray Callahan Fund's first grant cycle distributed funds to 3 shops in 2 states. Nora heard about this from Dylan Boone, who called in November to tell her how the first year's ride proceeds had been allocated. One of the recipients was a woman in Idaho who had been facing pressure from a local developer remarkably similar to what Nora had faced. The fund had helped her bridge a cash flow gap that would otherwise have forced her to sell. She does not know about you specifically, Dylan said, but she knows about the fund. She knows Holt set it up, and she knows it exists because someone decided that honest mechanics deserve to not have to stand alone. Nora was quiet for a moment. How is she doing? She said. Shop is open, Dylan said. She is fighting back. Good, Nora said. She was Ray Callahan's daughter. She knew what that meant. On a Tuesday in December, the anniversary of Holt's death, Nora opened the shop at 6:30, as she always did, made the coffee as she always did, and wrote his name in the margin of the schedule in the small, neat handwriting she used for notes. Not dramatically. Just because it was the right day to write it, and she had a pen in her hand, and the schedule was in front of her. Then she went to work. Tanner arrived at 7 and noticed the name in the margin, and did not say anything about it, which was the right response. He made himself coffee and looked at the day's schedule and said that differential on the Kowalski rig is going to need more time than we blocked for it. Nora said, I know, I already called him. He said, okay. And they both went to work. At noon, Dylan Boone called, which she had not expected. Just checking in, he said. Nora smiled, which he could not see, but which was there anyway. How many of you are calling me today, she said. A few of us, he said. Just to say. She understood what just to say meant, and she accepted it in the spirit it was offered, which was the spirit of people who knew Holt and were marking the day in whatever way seemed right to them. She thanked him and hung up and stood in the office for a moment. Through the window into the main bay, she could see Tanner working on the Kowalski differential. His movement steady and focused, the specific, purposeful concentration of someone doing a job they understand well. He was wearing a shop rag in the back pocket of his jeans, the way Ray had always worn one, not because anyone had told him to, but because it was the practical thing to do when you were working and your hands were regularly not clean. Nora watched him for a moment. Then she turned back to the desk and the day's paperwork and kept going, because that was what people like Nora Callahan did. They did not stay long in any single moment, however significant. There was always the next thing, the next vehicle, the next customer, the next problem to diagnose and resolve. The work was always there. The work was always worth doing. She picked up her pen and went back to it. There was a week in March, about 6 months after the annual ride, when Nora had 3 jobs come in on the same day that were all more complicated than they appeared, which was the kind of week that tested whether a shop was actually running well or just running. A Silverado with an intermittent electrical fault that took 3 hours to isolate. A Subaru with a timing issue that turned out to be related to a previous repair done somewhere else and done incorrectly. And Calhoun Steed's utility rig with a hydraulic system problem that needed a part she did not have in stock and had to order overnight. She called Calhoun to tell him about the part. How long, he said. One day, she said, it will be in tomorrow morning and I will have the rig done by noon. He said fine and meant it, which was still something she noticed even after months of working with him. A customer who said fine and meant it, who understood that parts availability was not something a shop controlled, and who did not treat the inconvenience of reality as a failure of service, was a genuinely good customer. She told him that she would discount the labor for the delay. You do not have to do that, he said. I know I do not have to, she said. My father always discounted labor when a job ran over the estimate for reasons that were not the customer's fault. I am continuing that. There was a pause. All right, Calhoun said. Thank you. Tanner was working on the Subaru when she came back through the bay, and she explained the situation with the previous repair to him and what it meant for how they needed to proceed. He asked good questions. He understood the answers. They worked out an approach together, which was something she had not been able to do with another mechanic since she had let the last part-time employee go, in which she had missed more than she had admitted to herself until it was available again. This is the part of the job they do not teach you, she said at one point when they were going over the diagnosis. What part, Tanner said. Figuring out how someone else got it wrong, she said without blaming them for it in front of the customer, and without losing the diagnostic thread because you are thinking about them instead of the problem. Tanner considered this. How do you do it, he said. Same way you do everything, she said. You look at what is in front of you, not what should be there. What is? He nodded slowly. Your father taught you that too, he said. Most of it, she said. The electrical fault on the Silverado turned out to be a ground issue in the instrument cluster, wiring a genuinely difficult find that required patience and the kind of systematic elimination that could not be rushed. Nora worked on it herself because Tanner was occupied with the Subaru, and because she liked this kind of problem, the kind that required reading a vehicle's behavior over time rather than simply identifying a broken component. Her father had liked these problems too. He used to say that a vehicle telling you it has an intermittent problem was the vehicle asking you to pay close attention, and paying close attention was something Ray Callahan did willingly. She found the fault mid-afternoon and repaired it and drove the truck up and down the county road 3 times to confirm the repair and then brought it back and wrote up the invoice and called the customer. All fixed, she said, and it will not come back. The customer, a farmer named Rudd, who had been bringing vehicles to the shop since before Nora was old enough to work on them, said your father used to say exactly that. All fixed, and it will not come back, and it never did. Nora smiled. I know, she said. I was standing right there the first time I heard him say it. She was standing there still. That was the thing. She had always been standing right here in these bays under these lights with these tools doing this work. The shop was not somewhere she had gone. It was somewhere she had always been. And the question of the last year, the question that Hollis had tried to force into a crisis, had never really been whether she would stay. It had been whether staying would be possible. It had been possible. It had required more than she had expected it to require. It had required the kind of help that you could not plan for and could not pay for and could not even fully articulate after the fact, the help of a man who had been fixed by her father 15 years ago and had remembered it in a specific way for a very long time. But it had been possible. She was here. The shop was open. The work was good. That was what Ray had always said when someone asked him how things were going. The work is good. He said it about hard days and easy days alike, about days when the jobs went smoothly and days when everything fought him. He said it because he meant it and because it was true, because the work itself, the actual business of understanding a problem and solving it correctly, was something that did not stop being good regardless of what was happening around it. Nora said it to herself sometimes now in the specific quiet of a moment when the shop was running well and the day had a good rhythm to it. The work is good. It was always going to be good because it was the right work in the right place, done the right way, and that was something that no one had ever managed to take from her. She picked up the next work order. She went back to work. The bay hummed with the ordinary sounds of a functioning repair shop, metal and air and the occasional voice, and outside the September light was hitting the sign her father had put up 31 years ago. Red letters on white exactly where it had always been. And Callahan Family Auto Repair was open for business and was going to stay that way.